Chapter 41, Meeting 1. 2 weeks passed at the academy, but Damien hadn't achieved anything special. Besides having to attend a single class once a week, his life wasn't that different from when he was an adventurer. Zenith City functioned based on normal currency rather than premium points, so Damien was able to get himself a quiet house to live and practice in. Premium points were used for facilities and the treasury, basically for anything needed to increase power. This was to incentivize students without stressing them. If premium points were required for housing and the likes, there would be much more chaos in the academy, especially because there wasn't any monthly allowance system. The history class Damien had enrolled in was extremely boring and reminded him of world history classes back in high school. So far, there had been no talk of the Great War, and all the history focused on the human domain and its development since the induction of mana. When he wasn't in class, Damien was back in his routine of constant work. He'd find any beast-slaying mission he could and complete it. Every once in a while, he'd go on collection missions as well. The reason he didn't particularly like these was because they were incredibly easy for him, who could teleport, and didn't help him improve. Right now, his issue was how to spend his premium points. There were many interesting potions and treasures in the academy treasury that he could buy, but most of them wouldn't really help him. His physical stats were too high for potions meant for first and second classes, and his mana capacity was even higher. The only option left for him was to use the lightning training grounds. He was genuinely disappointed in the development of his lightning affinity, but he never really put time into improving it. With the rapid improvements of his spatial affinity, there was no need to. However, Damien had now reached a roadblock in developing his spatial affinity. He knew which path he should take to further his vector control, but he didn't have anywhere to go after that. His third class couldn't stay as vector controller after all, so he decided to switch his focus and hope that it would grant him new ideas. He had long since given up on being creative in his uses of lightning. The only goal he had at this moment was to make it extremely destructive. He had also realized that his vector control could be used to enhance his lightning. He decided to train this aspect within the training area as it was specifically meant for lightning affinity users. Plus, he was curious about what these training grounds really were. The academy was structured similar to a university on Earth, making it essentially its own small city within Zenith City. Damien had plenty of trouble navigating at first, but the pamphlet he was given had a map as well, so he just opted to use that to get around. After walking for half an hour, Damien arrived in front of one of the largest buildings in the city. This building was shaped like a massive pyramid that pierced the clouds. It was the location of every training ground the academy possessed. When he entered, however, he saw a hall the size of a normal 2-story building without any of the steam age characteristics of the pyramid. Although confused, he just continued forward and registered himself for the lightning training grounds. There were 3 options available to him. First was the basic training ground, second was something called Lightning Valley, and finally was Thunder Mountain. Their prices were 10 100 and 500 premium points respectively. Looking at his student ID card, he saw the number 644 written next to the premium point section. Satisfied, he picked the highest option. He had no use for premium points beside using this facility, so he didn't care about his expenditure. The receptionist was surprised by his choice, but said nothing. He pushed a button on his station and led Damien to a door behind the desk. When the door was opened, Damien sensed slight spatial fluctuations, making him realize the truth behind the building. It was composed of many subspaces that catered to various affinities. The unique shape of the building most likely related to how the subspaces were sectioned off, and the button was most likely to choose which subspace the door would connect to. Entering the door, Damien was immediately greeted by a thick bolt of lightning that tried to strike him down, but before it could, he had teleported away. Turning around, Damien noticed that the door had disappeared. He then felt a ping from his ID card. Taking it out, he noticed that the words on its surface had changed. Damien Void. Thunder Mountain. Time remaining, 71 hours 59 minutes 55 seconds. To exit early, inject mana into your student ID card. It was plain and simple, but he understood the point. A verbal explanation for every new student would be a hassle, so this system was much more efficient. It could also be used for those who already knew the rules. Now that he had taken care of that, Damien finally got a chance to look at his surroundings. The name Thunder Mountain wasn't an exaggeration in the slightest. The ground around him was already on a slope, and in front of him stood one of the biggest mountains he had ever seen. It was larger than even Mt. Everest on Earth, standing proud at 10,000 meters. Its peak was shrouded in dark clouds just like the rest of the sky. There was nothing besides this mountain within the subspace. The entire area was constantly being struck by lightning bolts, with even the smallest ones being thicker than an arm. It seemed that the farther one climbed up the mountain, the stronger the lightning would get. Just looking at this lightning gave Damien insights towards increasing his destructive power. Everywhere it landed there would be havoc, with some rocks even disintegrating on contact. However, Damien could see much deeper than the normal person. He could see the rampaging lightning mana that ran through the ground like snakes, and he could see the highly compressed mana within the clouds. The purple-colored mana even permeated the air and the surroundings. Everything within this space was supercharged with electricity. Damien smiled as he looked towards the peak of the mountain. Let's hope the lightning up there isn't as painful as evolution. Leaving these words, Damien began a rapid climb to the peak. 3 days later, Damien could be seen on the peak of Thunder Mountain surrounded by volatile black lightning. Natural purple lightning as thick as a telephone pole constantly attempted to strike him down, but to no avail. When it met the black lightning surrounding Damien, they'd go through huge clashes, leading to chunks of the mountain peak being dislodged and causing landslides. However, he had only been training for 3 days. There was no way he would have advanced enough to ward off every bolt of lightning that was aimed at him. Very often, tens of lightning bolts would breach his own lightning defense and charge towards his body. While half of these would be deflected by his vector field, the other half were allowed to directly strike his body. This was because Damien had discovered something interesting. The lightning mana within this space could be devoured by his void physique to increase his comprehension. This absorption was the only reason he was even able to contend in quality with the lightning at the peak. The berserk natural lighting mana that entered his body rampaged, attempting to fry his organs and blood, but it was quickly tamed by the devouring force that emanated from his physique. The lightning-filled essence was then purified and sent back into his body to nourish it rather than to destroy. Suddenly, the Damien's eyes snapped open. Still seated, he let out a bestial roar into this sky, and as expected, this roar was accompanied by a massive whirlpool-like beam that escaped his mouth. The difference between this breath and the usual, however, was that the lightning that usually just danced around the spatial storm was actually integrated inside it. While the spatial storm tore through everything in its path and mutilated its targets, the lightning now followed its attack, incinerating everything that could have stayed intact after the initial damage. After spending a few minutes roaring with abandon, Damien smiled and checked his status. Status. Damien Void. Half human, half beast. Male, age 19. Level 75, Vector Controller, Lightning Main. Experience value, 78,450/80,000. Title S, Bearer of the Void Physique Evolver. Affinities, Space Lightning. Physique, Void Physique. Magic Power, 3900. STR, 275. AGI, 290. Def, 265. INT, 250. Dex, 290. Skills, Warp Level 5, Spatial Control Level 7, High-Level Regeneration Level Max, Sword Mastery Level Max, Mana Sense Level 8, Devour Level 5, Vector Control Level 6, Lightning Magic Level Max, Inventory. Trait S, Shock Absorption All-Seeing Eyes Level 3, Dragon's Breath. There weren't many changes to his status since he had last checked it in Kurt's subspace, besides his long-forgotten subclass. His physical stats and mana capacity had only increased by leveling, as he hadn't found any particularly special beasts that granted him massive gains like he did in the dungeon. The time he spent slaying beasts on the surface truly accentuated how special the dungeon was. Besides that, a few of his skills had leveled up a small amount, and his spatial magic had evolved into vector control. The change that he was excited to see, however, was that his lightning magic, which had been stuck at level 6 for the longest time, had finally achieved max level. According to the control stages he had recently learned of, he should still be in the mage level, but he wasn't far from reaching the master level. All he needed to do was find more abstract applications for his lightning. Checking his ID card, he noticed that his time within the training ground was over. The door had reappeared at the bottom of the mountain, and Damien directly teleported to it. Thinking that he should use this facility more often, Damien exited the door with a smile on his face. Upon his return to the reception area, though, Damien was greeted with a taunting and familiar voice. "Oh, look who we have here. What's with that stunned face? Don't tell me you miss me so much that you're too stunned to speak." Chapter 42, Meeting 2. "Oh, look who we have here. What's with that face? Don't tell me you miss me so much that you're too stunned to speak." In front of Damien stood a familiar pink-haired, ruby-eyed girl. Compared to the first time they met, Damien had to admit that she was much more attractive now. Last time she was wearing plain clothes as if to disguise her status, but today she was dressed up like Damien. She had on a sleeveless top with silver patterns running along its surface and a pair of pants that matched. Her shoes were a pair of black boots. Although it wasn't flashy, it was oriented for combat and coincidentally matched Damien. Looking at her curvaceous figure, Damien ended up stunned for a second, only to instinctively respond in kind. Yeah, I missed you so much, but I wonder who it was that couldn't wait to see me and waited eagerly for me at the door." Catherine, still in disguise, was also momentarily stunned. Even if she had a slight transformation from their last meeting, Damien's was outrageous. From his outfit to his neatly tied hair to the cross-shaped earring hanging from his ear, he looked like a completely different person. She also had a gnawing feeling that he was looking straight into her ruby eyes, completely unaffected by her disguise. "Well," Damien said in a questioning tone, "are we going to keep crowding in front of the door, or are you cool with leaving?" Catherine similarly snapped out of her daze as her face was colored red. In reality, she had also just come out of the door from the wind training ground and happened to see Damien exit after her. In her rush to tease him, she had forgotten that they hadn't moved. As the two continued trying to get the upper hand on one another, they exited the pyramid and headed to a cafe. It had been 3 months since they last talked, so there was plenty to catch up on. Within a certain office in the academy, a middle-aged man with black hair and red eyes looked down from his balcony, his gaze seemingly seeing past the various structures that inhibited it. "Oh ho ho, what an interesting duo, especially that boy. It seems I should keep an eye on him." The training grounds were secluded areas that most people couldn't peek into when they were occupied, but this didn't apply to everyone. The man was an exception to that privacy rule. "Oh ho ho, the elders are already scrambling to see who they should train for the upcoming event. Maybe I should get involved this year as well. After all, this is a special occasion." The man smiled as he went back to his desk, quietly continuing his work as he thought about the upcoming event. Meanwhile, Damien and Catherine had just finished eating and catching up about the past 3 months. Zara had also left the shadows to join them. As they walked around the academy, their conversation landed on the Nexus event. "So you're participating, right? Or are you perhaps some old fogey pretending to be young?" Catherine asked, still attempting to win their teasing match. "Please," Damien scoffed. "I'm 19 right now. I'm naturally a young and handsome genius ready to compete. If anything, aren't you the old fogey here?" "HMPH, didn't anyone tell you that it's rude to ask a lady her age? Besides, I'm not even that much older than you." Catherine pouted, but she was inwardly surprised. She was turning 21 this year, making her a year older than Damien, and she had one of the best nurturing environments one could hope for. Thinking this far, she couldn't help but wonder what his background was, but whenever the topic came up, he'd brush it off and change it. Anyway, I'm going all the way to the top in this event, so you better make it there too. I've been wanting to fight you since the moment we met, Damien continued. Catherine nodded her head with an eager look in her eyes. Although they could easily fight at any time, she understood his sentiment. In 5 months, they'd have immensely improved both their techniques and levels. Also, from Damien's words, it seems he wanted to fight for the first and second place positions, which made it even more exciting. Just thinking about it made her blood pump as her eyes filled with motivation. You're right, I can't waste any time on a loser like you. It seems I should go back to training. Not even waiting for a response, Catherine ran off. Damien smilingly shook his head. Well, I have to agree with her on that one. Training is what's most important for these next 5 months. Besides the tournament, that secret realm sounds like a lot of fun. I have a lot of preparing to do. Damien hopped on Zara's back as they flew out of the academy. He was going to train his sword art, so he needed open space. He didn't want to cause damage in the academy and be forced to pay for it. However, neither Damien nor Zara noticed a third presence tailing them with interest. Reaching a secluded forest, Damien hopped off Zara's back and pulled out his sword. Zara, I'll be staying here for a while, so don't worry about me. You've been staying in my shadow and letting me take all the rewards for the missions we've been going on. Go get stronger while I'm here. I'll wait for you and leave once you're back. Indeed, regardless of whether it was as an adventurer or student, Damien had always prioritized beast-slaying quests, and Zara never took any rewards. The bodies needed to be presented as proof of completion, so she didn't have any time to gain strength. After nodding at Damien gratefully and nuzzling up to him for a bit, Zara vanished into the woods. Damien kept his sword in his hands and sat down on the ground cross-legged. It's not yet time for me to create the 4th step, but I have plenty of improvement to do for the first 3 steps. Every use of his sword art had been catered towards mass destruction. He had never considered other uses of the art. Even chaining from one step to another was an unexplored concept. Hypothetically, if he could limit the effects of the 3rd step, spatial collapse, and use it to restrain the target in a locked space, it would immensely benefit the 1st and 2nd steps. Likewise, if he used the 2nd step, Dance of the Void, and used the 1st step, Bladeless, as a finisher, it could be a devastating attack. His sword art wasn't some structured masterpiece that exponentially increased in power when one move was chained to the next. Rather, it was more apt to call it a compilation of his achievements in the sword path. This made it so each move had a great deal of individuality, and there was immense potential for multiple combinations and chains. Damien only needed to work out the details. He had a feeling that once he completed this step and made this compilation into a true art, his sword mastery would finally evolve into something new. He sat there like a statue for 3 days without moving a single muscle, but every once in a while, the space around him would contort and collapse, while at other times his sword would randomly vanish. But throughout this process, only a small amount of damage was done to the surroundings. At the end of those 3 days, Damien slowly stood up with his eyes still closed. He began moving slowly, but as time passed his speed picked up. He looked like he was performing a one-man show, as he danced with abandon alone in the forest. His sword was kept in fluid motion, as small areas of the land kept disappearing without a sound. As his speed reached its climax, a change occurred. Every 5 moves of his dance, his sword would flicker and deep gashes were created in the lush ground. However, unlike the massive chunks that were damaged when he usually used the 1st step, these gashes were strictly linear and concentrated. The damage was more pronounced in its depth than its width. Damien kept his dance going for 4 weeks, every once in a while stopping when he ran out of mana, and going back into contemplating the fusion he was attempting. In the 1st and 2nd week, His dance was accompanied by the gashes created by the first step, but on the third and fourth, those gashes stopped appearing altogether. Instead, space would contort and thicken, causing the tree branches that were swaying in the wind, created by his movements, to abruptly pause for a second before they continued their movement. By the end of the fourth week, each swing of his was accompanied by a constricting pressure that disallowed any escape from his blade. Falling leaves were stopped in place and directly cut by his sword, and trees were split in half with their trunks being unable to fall over. When Damien finally stopped moving, many of the trees in his vicinity fell in different directions as the spatial locks disappeared. Damien's shirtless figure was covered head to toe in sweat. Although he had always trained himself intensively, this time he had gone without pause for over a month. The only time he stopped was when he ran out of mana, but even then he was pushing his brain to contemplate the fusion he was performing. But his efforts were rewarding. He hadn't been completely successful in learning how to fluidly switch between and combine the steps of his sword art, but he had made good progress. Looking at the surrounding environment, Damien noticed that Zara wasn't back yet, so he decided to once again work on refining his vector control, when all of a sudden, he heard the sound of clapping coming from behind him. That was a truly impressive showing, young man. Chapter 43, Meeting 3. A storm. This was the best way to describe the scene Damien saw when he turned around. A raging storm of crimson magic power that looked like a sea of blood. Without a second thought, Damien immediately teleported hundreds of meters away and released his own amethyst magic power. However, in front of that blood sea, his magic power was like a tiny boat swaying with the wind. Still, he didn't panic. Although the middle-aged man in front of him was extremely powerful, he didn't sense any hostile intent coming from him. Damien didn't let his guard down, though. This was someone who could kill him with a single smack. "Who are you?" Damien questioned as he glared at the man vigilantly. The man smiled. "Oh ho ho, you are indeed a feisty young man. Don't worry about who I am for now, just come at me with your full strength. If not, you might end up dead." Without another word, he disappeared from his spot. Before Damien could even register what happened, he was flying backward with such force that the trees behind him were crushed on contact with his body. "I felt this once before." The last time Damien felt this sensation of his brain being unable to keep up with the movement of his body was when he was thrown into the dungeon all those years ago. The cause? Naturally, it was a massive difference in strength. Damien no longer had the time to care about motive or identity. He couldn't even flee from someone whose strength was so far above his. He could only retaliate, or as the man said, he'd die. It was only after he had flown for a kilometer or so like a broken kite that he managed to stabilize himself. His back was covered in a cold sweat. The only reason he was still uninjured was simply that the man in front of him didn't seem to have any intention to hurt him with that strike. Damien promptly drew his sword and coated it with black lightning, warping directly in front of the man and slashing down. The man smiled lightly as he raised his hand to block the incoming sword. However, Damien didn't pay it any mind. Obviously, this old man is testing me or something. Who knew I'd get into a classic cultivation scenario in a fantasy world? Damien figured that this old man was some powerhouse who had witnessed his training and decided to have some entertainment. If that was the case, it was Damien's job to impress. Maybe he could gain some benefits that way. Damien smirked. If there was one thing he was confident in, it was his fighting ability. Without wasting time, he began performing his dance of the void while circling the man. For the first time, the small spatial tears and distortions created by the technique weren't able to banish anything to the void. The man kept leisurely watching Damien move while easily blocking all of his moves with a single hand. Damien was getting fed up. As he danced around the man attempting to inflict any wound he could, he used his other hand to lightly flick the air. Each time he flicked, molecules were forced to vibrate and plasma began generating. Then those beams of plasma shot towards the man from every direction. He also decided to stop conserving mana and wantonly attacked with various techniques. Still, nothing worked on the man. Huge rifts created by Bladeless were unceremoniously shattered, and as space collapsed and twisted, the man simply stood there unharmed. Beams of plasma kept firing, and at some point were amplified by volatile lightning, but all to no avail. It had been around an hour since Damien had started his attempt to harm this old man, but he hadn't been able to make the man budge even a single step. Damien's mana reserves quickly depleted. He was fighting much more recklessly than he usually did, but that wasn't for no reason. At some point, he stopped seeing this as a bid to impress the man in front of him. Rather, he had found a target who could withstand everything he threw at it. A perfect training dummy, if you will. Damien simply continued practicing combination attacks with his sword art and vector control as he circled the man continuously, every once in a while making distance and sending sword waves and thick lightning bolts. And 3 hours later, Damien ran out of steam. He smiled to himself as he thought of the improvements he'd made in the past 4 hours. Although the man didn't budge from his spot, the pressure of knowing his target could kill him at any time had pushed him forward. Frankly, Damien missed this feeling of death looming over his head. Suddenly, a voice rang out. "All right, now that that's over, how about we see if you can survive this one attack of mine?" Damien, in his excitement, had forgotten that the man was a living being and not a training dummy. When he looked up, the man was still standing calmly. However, the winds in the area had begun whipping violently. At first, he thought the man was a wind affinity user, but looking at the sky, he realized his mistake. Similar to the scene he had seen at Thunder Mountain, volatile black clouds rumbled in the air. The lightning within those clouds, however, was much worse than those of Thunder Mountain. In addition, it was also crimson in color. The lightning danced wildly before gathering at the spot above Damien's head, and then they sped down to smite him. Damien could feel that if he was struck by that lightning, he'd be severely injured if not dead. Everything seemed to stop as the only things left in the world were Damien and the red lightning that attempted to reap his life. Closing his eyes, Damien breathed in until his lungs couldn't contain any more air. The man stood watching this spectacle with interest. The boy in front of him truly was amusing. He had charged forward without hesitation, even knowing he couldn't beat his opponent. He had used someone exponentially stronger than him as a training dummy, and now in the face of death, he had closed his eyes. The man knew this wasn't the resignation that most people would feel at this moment. Rather, it was preparation for something. He was honestly impressed most by Damien's guts and his will. The thought of battling this boy when he reached the same level managed to make the man's blood boil, something he hadn't felt in many years. He smiled and continued observing, preparing to intervene if anything went wrong. But as the milliseconds ticked by, his brows became increasingly furrowed. Even now, the boy was still inhaling as if to fill his lungs with as much air as he could. From his observation, this boy had space and lightning affinities, so what use would breathing be? However, he didn't have to wait long for his answer. As the lightning reached halfway to Damien, his eyes snapped open, and without missing a beat, he opened his mouth. A huge roar that surpassed any mere beast erupted from the mouth of a human. Even the sound waves produced by this roar were enough to obliterate the environment around Damien. The ground shattered and caved, the trees flew in all directions, and the lush grass that covered the ground was reduced to ashes. Out of Damien's mouth came a beam of black light that had the thickness of a small tree trunk. Different from his usual breath that was more like a spatial storm, this one was a beam of destruction. There was no distinction between lightning and space, as they melded and fused into something greater. However, Damien was unaware of this. In his last-ditch attempt to survive, he had used up every last bit of mana he had in his system and ended up passing out on his feet. Two beams met in the sky, and the world was painted black and red. From the sky to the clouds was a massive lightning storm that could rip even a peak third-class being to shreds in an instant. And from the ground up, pure destruction. The blackness was thick enough to block all of one's senses, and space had completely shattered into pieces. The broken trees and ground in the surroundings had already been banished to the void, as black lightning wantonly shot through the air and sundered everything that still existed, creating countless massive craters. If one saw this scene, one would truly believe the world was ending. The man had long since grabbed Damien and escaped from the area of the collision. Although he could survive, he wasn't sure he could say the same for Damien. A few kilometers away, on top of a mountain peak, he stood and admired the chaos they had caused. Shifting his gaze to Damien, he couldn't help but admire the kid. He knew that the attack he had released was subconsciously put together, but whatever that power was, it was extremely dangerous. Even if he had lowered the intensity of the lightning to the peak of third class, it wasn't something a second class should ever completely block. He had at most expected Damien to offset some of the damage before he had to step in and save him. He smiled to himself once more. Interesting, interesting indeed. The kid's destructive power is great, but he has plenty to improve on. Haha, I'm excited to see the looks on those elders' faces when I'm finished with him. Deciding to keep up his identity as a mysterious senior, the man chose to leave while Damien was still unconscious. But before he did, he left a circular golden black token on Damien's chest along with a small note made with his mana. Kid, if you ever want to use that spatial training ground at the academy, take this token to the disciplinary building and hand it to the elder there. Next time we meet, we'll have some more fun. Chapter 44, Token 1. By the time Damien woke up, the sun had already set. His eyes fluttered open and he realized he was resting on Zara, who had returned a few hours ago, rather than collapsed on the floor. He learned from Zara that she had returned to the spot he was training after she finished her hunt, only to find pure devastation. Luckily, they had their link. Through this, Zara was able to locate Damien before her panic set in and also feel that he was safe. As she recounted the events on her side, Damien smiled wryly. The moments before he fainted started replaying in his head. For the first time in almost 3 years, he had been completely and utterly defeated. There wasn't even a chance for him to win. He had truly been humbled by the experience. Recently, he had begun slightly looking down on this world, as the only person he'd met who could match him even slightly was Catherine, but today proved to him that there were many hidden masters around the world. Only after ruminating over this point for a while did Damien realize the slight weight on his chest. Grabbing the object, Damien found the token and note that was left for him. His eyes slowly widened as he read its contents. No wonder that old man took an interest in me. It turns out he's one of the higher-ups in the academy. Who would have thought that the elders would have such power? His wry smile grew as he put on a set of clothes and hopped on Zara's back. As they took off, they flew over the site of Damien's last battle, leaving him extremely shocked. When Zara had said devastation, he thought she meant the gashes and craters from his assault, but he was sorely mistaken. The whole area was like a wasteland where life couldn't grow anymore and craters littered the cracked earth. The living greenery only existed over a kilometer away from the crux of the battle. What the hell happened here? Because I for sure didn't cause this. Damien remembered the final lightning attack the old man had sent at him, but his memory blacked out after that. Did I pass out and force him to save me from his attack? If he caused all this destruction on his own, how strong is he really? But he truly couldn't be mad at the old man's appearance. Even if he was slightly humbled, he improved immensely through the fight, if it could even be called that. He was much closer to the fluidity he had been seeking, and he even felt that he had slightly touched on something greater. However, no matter how much he tried to remember what that something was, he couldn't. Slowly but surely, Damien and Zara reached their abode in the academy. What greeted them was the yelling of a certain girl. "Hey, where have you been for the past 4 weeks? I've been looking all over for you." Once again, Damien was forced to smile wryly. The original plan was to be back in a week, but both he and Zara had gotten too into their training and forgotten the flow of time. "Yeah, sorry about that. We were out training, so how does the little princess want us to compensate her?" Damien teased. Catherine blushed at his form of address but knew he wasn't serious. HMPH, you owe me dinner and conversation for the next week. If you skimp me on this, I might just move in and annoy you to death. Damien shook his head. This girl seemed intent on intruding on his property no matter what. Even in that short amount of time they'd met each other before they went their separate ways to train, she had forced him to give her his address. Walking into the house with Catherine and Zara, Damien immediately plopped down on the couch. Fine, you can do whatever you want, but if you want to eat here, you're cooking. I don't have that kind of skill. Catherine rolled her eyes but still went to the kitchen. She had been trained in various arts by her family, not just in combat. Her cooking skills were excellent. As she started cooking, Damien decided to rant about the encounter he had while training. You wouldn't believe what happened to me earlier. I actually got beat up by some random old man who's apparently from the academy. He just showed up out of nowhere and started beating me up. Catherine's eyes widened. Someone capable of beating Damien up had to be immensely strong. However, she didn't voice this opinion as she had already gotten a taste of his shamelessness earlier. So Mr. Perfect finally got his ass handed to him, huh? How's it feel? You gonna cry? Why would I cry? Damien responded with a grin. That old man gave me access to the spatial training ground as a reward. Even that crazy guy thinks I'm awesome, see? Damien pulled out the token he had been given and waved it in her face to brag. Although he'd been humbled, change wasn't something that happened in an instant. Besides, shamelessness was a personality trait he possessed even before his fall. It was ingrained in his bones. Rolling her eyes, Catherine looked up at the token Damien was holding before her eyes widened in shock, and she dropped the knife she was holding. Why, you bastard? Tell me right now, what did that old man look like? Damien was confused by the sudden change in her behavior, but obediently described the man's appearance. He was a middle-aged man with purple hair and red eyes. His build was kinda big, but he obviously can't compare to me. Also, he used red lightning to attack. You should have seen his magic power. It seriously looked like a sea of blood. The more he talked, the more shocked Catherine became. She knew the identity of the man Damien had met, but decided not to tell him. It'd be fun to see how he reacts when he finds out. He must be a pretty high-ranking elder then. Those tokens aren't something just anyone can give out. Catherine lied with a straight face. She then continued cooking as if nothing happened as the two continued to banter and talk about various subjects. Soon the food was ready. Arriving at the table, Damien was genuinely surprised. It was beast meat and something that looked like rice with assorted vegetables. A simple but refined meal. Taking his first bite, he almost melted on the spot. Wow, you weren't kidding about your cooking skills. This is wifey-level skill right here for sure. Someone needs to wife you up ASAP. Damien sang his praises before quickly adding, not me though. Catherine was happy with his praise and even slightly blushed at the talk of wifing her up. But hearing the last part of the sentence, her mood immediately fell. HMPH. Guess someone never wants to eat my cooking again. Zara, you come here. It's all us girls now since a certain someone wants to be cheeky. Smirking at Damien, Zara pranced over to Catherine before getting comfortable at her side. Damien's mouth was agape seeing this scene. Why is Zara walking like a pretentious anime girl? Wait, since when did she even learn how to walk like that? Is this the so-called girl power that even spans the racial and communication barriers to team up against unsuspecting men like me? Quickly realizing that he'd get nowhere if he didn't correct himself, Damien hurriedly responded. Okay, fine. I would love to marry you, oh beautiful Catherine. Now continue making me food, okay? Naturally, the food was his main objective. It was too good for him to be forced to stop eating it for such a small mistake. Good that you know. Oh, by the way, I don't want to marry you so you can keep all that talk to yourself, Catherine said with a smirk. Damien was endlessly sighing in his heart. If she didn't care in the first place, why did she have to bring it up? He guessed that this was an irrational woman thing that he'd never understand, only to pause his train of thought as two murderous glares landed on him. Cold sweat drenched his body. Devils, they're truly devils who can read my mind. The whole situation was so bizarre to him, who was terrible at social contact, that he forgot that one of them could genuinely read his mind. After that stunt, their dinner continued with more laughing and joking before Catherine left back to her abode. Before departing, though, she had also left him a message. You should head over to the disciplinary building with that token right away. Something tells me that there'll be an interesting surprise waiting for you there. Damien was put off by the suspicious and sly smile on her face, but decided to heed her advice. He had an inkling of her status, so if she was saying it'd be a surprise, it'd definitely be worth it. Since he had already gotten ample rest after he passed out, Damien couldn't sleep. He decided to ruminate over his gains from the past 4 weeks before heading over with the token in the morning. What does that old man have planned for me this time? Chapter 45, Token 2. The disciplinary building was only 5 minutes from the pyramid containing the training grounds, so Damien didn't have any problem locating it. This building was a normal rectangular 2-story building attached to a separate smaller building that seemed to be a prison of some sort. Entering the building, Damien was faced with many students of all ages walking around and doing their jobs. A few were even dealing with other students, who seemed to have been brought in due to violations. Damien quizzically watched these activities and mentally compared them to police stations back on Earth. The processes were mainly the same, only the disciplinary officers in the academy had much more prestige than cops. Keeping order in the academy was a job that could get you a continuous supply of premium points, so it was naturally sought after by many. But there were strict criteria and evaluations necessary before one could be accepted, leading it to be extremely desired by the students. Admission trials for the officer position officially ended a week ago, so there's no need to look around. A strict feminine voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Damien looked over and saw a tall, blonde girl with green eyes looking at him with annoyance. I don't want any position here. Anyway, where's the elder that runs this place? I was told to come see him, he responded, ignoring her irritated tone. Hearing his request, the girl's expression shifted to disdain. If you were planning to lie, then at least come up with a better one. Everyone knows that Elder Blanc is a woman. Damien shrugged. I want to see her then, is that better? This further infuriated the girl. This is the disciplinary office. No random hobo off the side of the street can come here and act as they please. Leave now before I use force. Damien rolled his eyes. What's with the cultivation novel scenarios I keep getting myself into? Isn't this supposed to be a fantasy world? He had no intention to go through a whole misunderstanding and face-slapping situation, so he just stopped bickering and pulled out the token he was given. Here, take this and quit your yapping. Seeing something fly at her, the girl was about to attack but stopped when she noticed what it was. Carefully catching the token, she observed it as carefully as she could. It was an intricately carved circular token filled with black and gold colors. On its surface was an image of a 9-headed serpent, a hydra. Seeing this, the girl stopped in her tracks. Where did you get this? She asked in a shaky voice. I fought an old man, and he gave it to me afterward with a note telling me to come see an elder here. Now do you believe me, or does this have to get annoying? The girl quickly shook her head. No matter how much she wanted to claim that the token was fake so she could cause problems for the annoying guy in front of her, she couldn't. There was a limited amount of these tokens forged in the first place, and although people had attempted to forge them, there was a secret mana signature embedded in each true token that proved its authenticity. Her face flushed in shame. The girl quickly ran to the second floor of the building, seemingly going to grab the elder. With the authenticity of the token proven, she couldn't mess with Damien anymore unless she wanted to get expelled from the disciplinary squad or worse, the academy itself. On the second floor, the girl ran to a certain door and knocked furiously. Come in. Gaining permission, the girl entered the room with shaky hands. Upon entering, she saw a beautiful middle-aged woman with black hair and cold blue eyes leaning over a desk. Although this woman could be said to look older, she had in no way lost her beauty. She had a figure that could make countless men fall for her with a single glance. This was the disciplinary head, Elder Rosary Blanc. Seeing who entered the room, her gaze softened slightly. "What is it, little Lana? Was there a problem that you couldn't solve on your own?" Lana slightly nodded before shaking her head. Even after many years, she was still infatuated with the elder's appearance. The fact that she always treated Lana like a big sister or mother rather than an elder only worsened her condition. "Elder, there is indeed a case I can't handle, but it isn't anything from the disciplinary squad. Take a look at this," Lana said as she handed over the token. Inspecting the item in her hands, the elder's eyes widened in shock. "This is—" Lana nodded, still holding some shock many minutes after realizing the identity of the token. The elder sighed and shook her head as she stood up. "All right, take me to whoever brought this in." Although she was outwardly calm, she was brimming with questions internally. What the hell is that old fogey doing? Damien spent 10 minutes enduring various gazes that landed on him curiously. It had to be known that Lana was both the most important member of their squad and the strongest. For someone to make her behave like that, they must be interesting. Only after what felt like hours of silence did Damien hear footsteps coming from the staircase. This was Lana and Elder Blanc. Arriving in front of Damien, the elder looked him up and down. Besides his above-average looks, she couldn't see anything special about him. "So, how did you end up getting your hands on this token?" Once again, Damien repeated the story of how he was beaten up by an old man and woke up with the token and the note on his body. Elder Blanc shook her head in exasperation. "That damn fogey is always doing eccentric things. Anyway, we can't do anything for you in this case. This is just one of that old man's games." Damien raised his brow at this. If they couldn't do anything for him, then why was he even here? Sensing his confusion, Elder Blanc continued speaking. "I'll explain. Our disciplinary squad is one of the only places where the authenticity of this token can be verified, so he probably sent you here for that. As for finding him, your best bet is the mountain in the distance behind the academy." Damien knew which mountain she was referring to. It was larger than even Thunder Mountain that he had trained at and was located only a slight distance from the academy. He didn't know its name yet, but he had already figured it held some importance. "That mountain is probably full of traps and other annoyances that you'll have to pass through before you can reach him. That old man loves to think of himself as mysterious and go around testing people, so good luck with whatever it is you plan to do from here on out." Damien thanked the elder before turning to leave, only to remember something he'd forgotten for a while. "Ah, shit, I haven't been to class in like a month." Hearing his exclamation, the elder shook her head. They're truly alike. That old fogey also had this indifferent to anything but training mentality back then. No wonder he took a liking to this kid. Waving her hand, she addressed him. "It's fine, kid. Just go meet with that old fogey and make him teach you. I'll have someone contact your teacher and notify them. Just tell me your name first." "Damien Void," he replied. The elder nodded before heading back to her study. Receiving that affirmation, Damien once again said his thanks before leaving. Back in her office, the elder looked through the new student roster to find Damien's name. "Damien Void, what?" Finding his name, the elder leapt up in shock. "Age 19, level 75, spatial and lightning affinity. That old bastard. He knew I'd only check the books after everything was done. He fooled me again." Just like the rest of the elders, she was looking for people to sponsor or train for the Nexus event so she could gain some benefits, and Damien had been one of the candidates on her list. Spatial affinity was incredibly rare, and he was also an immense talent, making him someone many elders were paying attention to. Unfortunately for her, her favorite student Lana was already past the 40-year age limit, so she couldn't participate. So the old bastard is also participating this year. And if it's that kid, I wonder if the rest of us stand a chance. Flipping through the rest of the pages of the roster, Elder Blanc found something interesting. "Oh, another promising seedling. Looks like I'll have to place my bets on her. The page she was looking at had a picture of a slightly above-average girl with black hair and brown eyes. Catherine Hart, age 21, level 85, wind, and illusion affinity. Chapter 46, Circuits 1. Since it was relatively close, it took less than a day for Damien to reach the mountain. It looked to be close to a full 10,000 meters in height, leaving Damien stunned by its magnificence. It didn't have the same rumbling sky or cracked surface as Thunder Mountain did. Rather, this one was a true natural beauty. The entire mountainside was filled with lush trees and various beautiful flowers. When he spread his awareness, Damien could sense many beasts cohabitating its surface as well. And unlike the scenes in the dungeon, these beasts didn't constantly feed on each other for growth. There were even a few species that seemed to be herbivorous, without the need or desire for meat. It was a clear day, so Damien could see up to the peak of the mountain, which was capped in snow, giving off a beautiful contrast with the vibrant colors that led up to it. Damien thought this environment gave off a feeling of bliss. No endless fight on the path to strength, no burdens or worries, and no pressure. However, this type of life didn't appeal to him. He loved gaining strength. He loved pressure that stimulated his growth. And although he didn't love burdens, he knew they were inevitable if one had even a single person or thing they cared about. In reality, everything besides oneself could be considered a burden on this long and arduous path, and it was normal for many people to forsake everything for the sake of strength. Some people even choose to be so cold-hearted that their own families become nothing more than pawns to fit their needs. Damien knew he had the chance to take this path if he truly wanted to, but he didn't have any desire to become like this. He liked his human side, his sometimes volatile emotions, and the bonds he had with the select few people he was close with. He agreed that others could become burdens for him, and he even understood that from a certain perspective, his own mother who was bedridden could be considered a burden, but he didn't care. He had a taste of the endless cycle of blood that came from being alone, the feral and primal nature that one would begin to develop. He had no interest in that. If he wanted to do that, then that day he would have forsaken his humanity and devoured Zara rather than saving her. Shaking his head, Damien snapped out of his thoughts. Now wasn't the time for introspection. He gazed up the mountain and thought to himself, if I'm being honest, I could spam teleport and make it to the peak in a few seconds, but I doubt that's what that old man wants. It had only been 2 days and he was already tired of playing the old man's games, but he decided that he'd concede with this one last challenge. Without further ado, Damien began rushing up the mountain. And indeed, just as Elder Blanc had suspected, there were countless traps set up along the way. Some were stupid traps that could only kill mortals, such as a swinging tree trunk, but some were even slightly dangerous to him. There was a pit full of third-class vipers that he almost fell into, mechanisms that suppressed his spatial ability and forced him to narrowly dodge razor-sharp blades with his bare body, and many other traps. This old man seriously has a wild imagination. Damien kept climbing without stopping as he evaded trap after trap. Surprisingly, no beasts attacked him besides those within the traps. It seemed that there was some sort of order among them. Even the ones that looked desperate to eat him begrudgingly turned away as he continued his climb. And by the time night fell, Damien reached the snow-covered peak. There he saw a familiar middle-aged man staring into the distance with his back facing Damien as if to come off as more mysterious. Knowing that this was the old man's quirk, he didn't pay attention to it, instead opting to sit down and recover his mana. When Damien closed his eyes, the man took a peek behind him and witnessed Damien completely ignoring him. He was disgruntled but didn't bother the kid as he recovered his mana. Half an hour later, Damien's eyes began to open, and the man returned to his original pose of gazing into the distance. "Old man, there's no need to act so mysteriously with me. That elder already told me about your antics." The man's shoulders twitched a bit when he heard this, and he reluctantly turned around. "That damn witch. Looks like I need to teach her a lesson when I get back." Noticing Damien's deadpan gaze, the man quickly changed the subject. "Hum, I guess now is the time for formal introductions. My name is Malcolm Gray, and I am the headmaster of Zenith Academy, and I want you, Damien Void, to be my student." The air of an expert radiated from Malcolm as he revealed his status, waiting to see the shock on Damien's face. However, Damien's gaze was still deadpan. "Okay, now what?" Malcolm's brows twitched. "Kid, don't you get it? The headmaster of the whole academy wants to take you as a student. Aren't you supposed to be like, wow, what an opportunity, or something?" Damien's dead fish gaze intensified. "Old man, I figured you were the headmaster after the reactions of everyone I showed the token to. It isn't that hard. Also, why would I be surprised about you wanting to train me? You literally made it so obvious with all the testing and mysteriousness. So, let's just get on with the actual training part." The twitch in Malcolm's brow became even more pronounced. Not only was the kid being so blunt that it slightly damaged his ego, he even had the nerve to keep calling him old man, even though he's known his status since the beginning. Sighing at the fact that he couldn't keep his cool image, Malcolm's eyes turned serious and his whole aura shifted. "Very well, since you want to learn, then let's start immediately. Your sword art seems to be original, and you've already found a path, so I won't say anything about it. The same goes for your spatial affinity. I can teach you about lightning, but that'll be secondary." Damien felt his pride swell hearing all the praise he was getting, but he was soon brought back to reality. "The most important thing is your mana control. Frankly, it's shit. Completely garbage for someone your age. Even little 5-year-old children can easily wield mana better than you without even trying. I saw during our first fight that you have immense reserves of mana, but you still ran out within only a couple of hours. Truly, you should be ashamed of yourself." Damien was too stunned to speak. Since he had begun his climb in strength, he had never received such a harsh rating of his abilities. He fought a third class and succeeded in killing him, begetting praise. His level was insane for his age, begetting praise. Not once had someone insulted or berated him since he had left Earth. He was about to retort and get angry at the old man, but he stopped himself and thought about the words he had heard. The more he thought, the more he realized the truth in those words. Damien had put all his focus on his sword art and his affinities. Not once had he ever focused on mana control. He had always used mana however he pleased without any rhyme or reason to it. In the first place, the structure of his mana control was based on how it had been utilized by the feral version of him when he had been taken over by his bestial instinct. How could a feral beast with barely any conscious thought be able to compare to an intelligent being? Beasts above second class had already started developing intelligence, so even they probably had better mana control than him. His eyes hardened as he realized this. I truly got too conceited recently. If nobody had said anything, I probably wouldn't have corrected it before it turned into a habit I can't change. Malcolm had been watching Damien this whole time, seeing how he'd react to his harsh words. In fact, he had made sure to make his words more taunting specifically to test Damien's reaction. At first, he was disappointed seeing Damien get angry, but as he continued to watch Damien fall into thought and saw his eyes harden as he realized the truth, Malcolm became appreciative. This kid was truly worthy to become his disciple. Pride is normal and was bred within almost every life form as they gained strength. With all the hard work most people put into their strength, how could they not hold immense pride over their achievements? The main issue was knowing when pride turned into arrogance and fixing the issue before it stabbed them in the back. Seeing Damien look up at him, Malcolm smiled. "Good, it seems you've realized the truth of the matter. Let me reintroduce myself then. My name is Malcolm Gray, a 4th class, and the only person in the human domain who has reached the saint level in mana control. Are you willing to accept me as your teacher?" This time, Damien's eyes truly did widen in shock. The quirky old man in front of him was actually a 4th class, and someone who reached saint level to boot. This level was seen as a legend by many people in the world, but someone who had reached it was standing before him. His decision didn't even take a second. Bowing his head, Damien repeated a line he'd read countless times in novels. Damien greets his new teacher. Malcolm's smile grew even wider. Good. Now let's start our training to make you unstoppable in the Nexus event. The first and most important priority, mana circuits. Chapter 47, Circuits 2. Mana circuits. According to Malcolm, mana circuit was a term used to broadly define the pathways and methods people used to wield their mana. Since everyone's body was different and everyone had different specializations, there were many different iterations of mana circuits created through the years. Many important clans and powers within the world have their own methods for structuring mana circuits that have been passed down through the generations, highlighting their strengths. However, there were also generalized methods for their creation as well. Even the common populace could easily get their hands on these, which was why Malcolm was surprised at Damien's terrible usage of mana. The purpose of mana circuits was to act as both a pathway for mana, similar to meridians in cultivation novels, as well as to optimize and amplify its power. The structure of the mana circuit of someone who specialized in defense would mirror that, while the same went for offense and support. Malcolm continued to talk about the history of mana circuits, which dated back thousands of years. By the end of the spontaneous lecture he was given, Damien truly felt enlightened. To think there were so many different ways to utilize mana, Damien felt like an idiot for never trying to learn about this. There weren't books on it within Kurt's subspace in the dungeon either, making him believe that this specific knowledge was kept elsewhere. Now that you have all the general information, your job is to create your own mana circuit. After seeing your talent the other day, I'm sure you can do it. My mana circuits were built using the volatile nature of lightning as its base, but yours needs to be different. Malcolm hadn't been idly standing by when Damien was climbing the mountain. He had been carefully watching to see how Damien dealt with every situation. It's clear to me that lightning isn't something that you particularly focus on, only using its destructive power occasionally. So, you need to either structure your mana circuits based on your spatial affinity or do something new. The choice is up to you. Damien fell into thought. Although my spatial affinity is definitely my strongest power and will most likely remain that way in the future, it's not all I have. Although it was faint, Damien still remembered the feeling he had that he touched upon something greater. While he didn't know exactly what it was, he knew that he couldn't close off the doors that led to that possible future. Naturally, as your teacher, I won't force you to start and continue the process without any guidance. While most of the work will be done by you, I'll give you a starting point and help you if you ever come across roadblocks in your path. Listening to Malcolm, Damien smiled. A teacher that didn't restrict him and instead chose to subtly guide his path was exactly what he needed. Seeing the fire that was growing in Damien's eyes, Malcolm continued. I suggest you start by feeling the structure of your internal body. This can be a great basis to create your circuit. And finally, he decided to end his speech. The body itself is a huge interconnected system that keeps you functioning, and mana circuits are very similar to veins and arteries. That's it from me. Inject some mana into that token if you ever need to contact me. With that, Malcolm vanished. Damien didn't even realize this, though, as he continued ruminating over the new information he had gained. Although the concept of mana circuits was extremely different, Damien knew that his own method would be vastly different from the denizens of this world. After all, he wasn't a native here. He had Earth's specialty from before mana erupted, science. Mana technology and previously modern science were leagues apart in both functionality and methodology. Since mana was a mysterious energy that could break the laws of physics, it made many new things possible. However, precisely because it was constrained and limited by the laws of physics, modern science was full of great ideas and the ingeniousness of mankind. Many things were already theorized using science that became easily applicable due to mana. Like this, Damien decided to make his mana circuits function more algorithmically. He would create an intricate system within his body that boosted his efficiency and output manifold. He only had 5 months to design and implement this system. He decided that he would put any development into his abilities on hold and focus wholeheartedly on this task. Other than his daily practice to make sure his skills don't rust, he wouldn't do anything else. He spent the next week on the mountain peak, sitting unmoving as he studied the structure of his internal body. He had done this once before, but only for a single arm. This time, he focused on everything: the rate at which his heart pumped blood, and the movements of that blood through his veins and arteries to create a sort of feedback loop, the flexing of his muscles that caused various tendons and ligaments to move as his bones followed suit, even the response of neurons sent to and from his brain down his spinal cord that facilitated his control over his body. Damien put his whole focus onto these processes to the point that he no longer felt the flow of time around him. He also pondered on various examples of mana circuits he had read about to see if they had any use in real-life scenarios. He wasn't a big science fanatic back on Earth, so he wasn't familiar with too many theories that could help him, but he had the basic knowledge to use as a basis. His ambition for his mana circuits was as grand as can be. Maybe not within these 5 months, but sometime in the future, he wanted his mana circuits to act as a perpetual motion system. If his idea succeeded, he'd, in theory, gain access to a nigh-infinite supply of magic power. However, whether through mana or science, perpetual motion has never been achieved. Nothing could continue moving indefinitely when it was drawing from a finite power source. Even celestial bodies, which seem to rotate and move infinitely, do not truly achieve perpetual motion. Many forces disrupt their flow of kinetic energy, such as solar winds, gravitational and thermal radiation, etc. To even gain a possibility of achieving the wild dream of infinite mana, Damien needed to create a mana circuit that could constantly evolve. Evolve. The word brought back memories of his first evolution after killing that first-class wolf. What was it that allowed me to evolve at that time? Although I believe in my will and tenacity, it wouldn't be enough to grant me a perfect evolution. No, it was my void physique that allowed that. His void physique had always been a mystery to him. It devoured energy like a black hole, but also fed him energy whenever he evolved. He had even begun to muse that his devour skill might be a product of his physique. He had never truly studied his physique in depth, and the reason was that its actual location was unknown to him. This problem might sound stupid, as physiques were essentially one's body, but Damien's was different. He could always feel a faint connection to what he assumed to be his void physique, and it was always superimposed on his body, yet not existing within it. It was confusing even for him, as if its true existence was in a separate dimension or something. Still, he determined that his physique was the beginning of the path he needed to take to reach his insane goal. So, he put his all into attempting to study it. Another week passed without any progress. Damien was starting to get frustrated. He had never experienced failure in his training, only slight setbacks that he could overcome with time. This time, he hadn't even been able to find an inkling of a path forward. But he wasn't going to quit now. He had seen a vision of the insane power he could grant himself in the far future if he succeeded here, and he wasn't going to let it go easily. If he couldn't reach his void physique directly, he'd simply need to study his devour skill first, since he suspected that they were linked. The devour skill was the method his physique utilized to help him evolve. This was his conjecture, and as he spent his time studying it, he knew he was correct. The devour skill was mysterious in just how greatly it could optimize the usage of energy he devoured, and this was specifically the concept he was focusing on. Optimizing the energy, amplifying its effect, and evolving when a better option was presented. Damien had finally found a clue. He had to build a true physical construct within his body that could be evolved, enhanced, and tweaked as he pleased. Rather than an ethereal path to carry his mana, he decided to change his body structure. For the first step, he took an idea he had seen used countless times, a mana core. Although it wouldn't be cultivated the same way, the concept was similar. However, he had no interest in wantonly experimenting with his body and accidentally injuring himself. He first drew his magic power out of his body and began compressing it. He used his spatial affinity to aid this compression as he gushed out mana into a ball on his palm. The sphere shrunk as its power grew, but it looked more like an attack than something that would become corporeal. He then decided to revolve the ball of mana as it was compressed, hoping that this would also aid the process. And aid it did. The ball became smaller and smaller as the mana that composed it started liquefying. And by the time he had used up half of his mana capacity, all that was left on his palm was a small amethyst marble that he could pick up and move as he pleased. It was pure solidified mana. After half a month, he had taken the first step forward towards his grand ambition. Chapter 48, Circuits 3. Another half a month passed, as Damien moved to ponder the structure of his mana circuits. Mana circuits were ethereal but still tethered to the body. If he wanted to design an intricate circuit, he needed to plan it well. Being interlinked with the body means that any small injury could disrupt his entire circuit. It was the same idea as removing a small cog from a huge machine and causing its downfall. To solve this problem, Damien decided to design his circuits in quadrants pertaining to specific areas of his body. This way, if his arm ended up getting severed, the overall system would only slightly weaken rather than shutting down. This was solely for the ethereal aspect of his mana circuits. The corporeal structure that he was creating was different and didn't possess the same flaw. It was essentially a new body part and would qualify to regenerate through his skill, so he didn't need to worry about it. Damien had done many experiments over the past half a month on how he should structure the physical aspect of his circuits, and he had finally decided. The mana core he had created would be placed in the center of his chest, essentially becoming a second heart, and he would form veins that scaled his entire body connecting to that heart. He also decided that a set of meridians were necessary to facilitate the flow and blockage of energy. These would be smaller variants of his mana core that carried only a portion of its functions. The creation of this corporeal system would be a long and grueling process, and he didn't even have enough mana to complete what he had now termed as his mana heart, so he once again tried something new. Rather than devouring corpses, he targeted his skill at the atmospheric mana around him. Surprisingly, it worked. He couldn't increase his mana capacity this way, but refilling his tank at a rapid pace was child's play. Luckily, he would be able to move around fine during the process and wouldn't have to complete it all in one go. After all, his mana circuits wouldn't have negative effects on his internals even while they were incomplete, as their functionality would be null until he completed their ethereal counterpart. The final thing he had to decide was the basis of his ethereal circuits. It would be most logical at this point for Damien to optimize them towards his spatial affinity, but he opted against that. He didn't want to be limited to just that much. However, he couldn't make circuits that accepted everything, as it would limit his potential due to having too much freedom. Instead, he decided to keep it broad but not too expansive. He wanted his mana circuits to focus on destructive power. He decided to block off all routes he had towards external healing and more positive powers. Naturally, this wouldn't disallow his own regeneration and similar skills, but he wouldn't be able to utilize such practices on others. During the month that had passed since Damien began, Malcolm had visited weekly to track his progress. However, every time he came, Damien was deep in thought and didn't even notice his presence. What surprised Malcolm was that Damien hadn't even started construction of his mana circuits yet. For a genius like him, it should be easy, so Malcolm figured that Damien was aiming for something greater. He naturally supported this, but he hoped that Damien wouldn't try to do too much and end up failing. There were only 4 months left until the Nexus event officially began, so Malcolm once again decided to check on Damien. Reaching the mountain peak, he saw Damien standing up and playing with an amethyst marble. This was the first time Malcolm had seen a change in Damien, so he was pleasantly surprised. Sensing something peculiar about the marble, Malcolm analyzed it, only to be shocked by what he found. The marble was made up of pure crystallized mana, something he didn't expect to see from someone who was working on mana circuits. Damien, what are you planning to do with that? Malcolm was a bit suspicious since that marble had the potential to be used as a bomb, but Damien's answer left him even more surprised. Old man, you're back. This is nothing, just a slight experiment I did while I was contemplating the mana circuits I'm going to make. I have the base idea down now. All I need to do is implement it. Hearing this, Malcolm decided not to ask too many questions. Damien's choice was his alone, and as long as he didn't plan to use those mana beads as weapons, he didn't care. All right then. You have 4 months left until the start of the event, so make sure not to waste too much time. Malcolm was about to leave once again when Damien stopped him. Take me with you this time, old man. I'm going to take a little break before I start for real. Malcolm nodded. It wasn't a bad thing to take rest every once in a while, especially during a big project like Damien's. Damien only felt his shoulder be grabbed before the wind started whooshing around him. The next thing he knew, he was back at the academy. Bidding farewell to Malcolm, Damien headed back to his abode where he was once again greeted by Catherine. Since the last time they had met, she decided that she'd stay at his house. She claimed that the dorm she was staying in was too stuffy compared to it. He would usually be against it, but he honestly doesn't stay at the house much and Zara seemed to enjoy her company, so he agreed. Speaking of Zara, she hadn't been with Damien since he left for the mountain. He told her to stay home when he left and realizing that he'd be at the peak for a while, he told her to hunt and increase her strength. He'd only be back for a day, so he decided he wouldn't disturb her training. Once again, Damien plopped down on the couch as Catherine went to the kitchen to make food. If anyone else saw them, they'd think the two were dating, but the two of them were too oblivious to even make the connection. You could have told me that old man was the headmaster, you know. I mean, I guessed it easily, but still. Catherine giggled in response. Well, I thought it'd be more fun to surprise you. Oh yeah, did he take you as his student? Damien rolled his eyes. Yeah, the old man is helping me fix some things that I was being stupid on. What about you? With your talent, there has to be an elder who wanted to teach you. Catherine smiled. Yup, it was one of the grand elders too. Her name is Elder Monique and she specializes in illusion affinity as well. I can't wait to beat you up in the tournament. Sure, you'll be the one beating me up. You have to be careful though, if you lose I might just have to spank your butt as punishment. Damien replied with a sly smile. Shameless, Catherine muttered as a rosy blush covered her face. The two continued chatting as they ate dinner with each other. They were growing closer at an abnormal rate that would be weird by anyone's standards. After all, the two have only had close relations for around 2 months. However, it wasn't surprising. Catherine was a sheltered girl with an adventurous personality that quickly got attached to anything she found interesting. As someone who didn't have many close friends, she gravitated towards Damien often. Damien was similar as well, and him being terrible at talking freely with anyone besides her, he also gravitated towards her. The two had a slight amount of codependence, but it wasn't unhealthy. If two people only had each other in the same age range that they could freely speak to and were also extremely similar in their personalities, it'd be weirder if they didn't get close fast. But they were both dense as a lake, so neither had noticed this in the slightest. Night soon fell and the two retired to their rooms. Damien, however, warped back to the mountain peak. It was relatively close, so he didn't need to use too much mana. Talking with Catherine for a few hours honestly made him much more refreshed than sleep did. He didn't know why that was, but just assumed that it came from the synergy between like-minded people. Spending a few hours to recover his mana, Damien ended up falling asleep. He woke up the next morning with a wide smile on his face. There are only 4 months left for the competition to start. If everything does as planned, it'll take 2 months to develop the corporeal system and 2 months to develop the ethereal one. Without waiting, Damien began the process. The first step was the mana heart. Just like he did previously, he gathered mana in a ball shape. Only this time it was at the center of his chest, directly next to his heart. This was a step Damien needed to take extra care with. He gently used his spatial affinity to compress the swirling ball of mana in his chest. As time passes, the ball became smaller and smaller, and at this time Damien started devouring the atmospheric mana. Rather than a marble, he wanted his mana heart to be at least the size of a golf ball. The mana kept compressing as even more mana was added to it, creating a semi-liquefied ball whose mass kept increasing. He lost track of time and even of the functions of his body as his sole focus was compressing his mana heart. Mana roared in his body, protested the foreign mass that had intruded on its structure, but Damien didn't care. He had already run many simulations and figured out the perfect positioning for each piece of his new organ. The strain was only present due to the large portions of mana that were still being liquefied. Damien continued like this for an entire day and a half. Every time his mana capacity lowered, it was regenerated by the ambient mana he devoured, and this mana went directly into his mana heart. By the end of the second day, Damien fell to the floor exhausted. His consciousness started fading due to the intense concentration and mana depletion he had felt over the past 2 days, but he held a wide smile on his face. Within his chest, he could feel it. Although it didn't beat or pump anything, he could feel a second baseball-sized heart made entirely of mana, just waiting for him to give it function. Chapter 49, Prelude 1. The next 4 months passed without any unexpected scenarios. In the time, Damien wasn't training either by creating his mana circuits or getting lectured about lightning by Malcolm. He was constantly with Catherine. They made a point to at least have dinner together every night, having idle conversation about their days and what they were doing with their respective teachers. Naturally, they left out the most important details so they could surprise each other when they actually fought, but everything else was shared. When Catherine heard that Damien had never heard of mana circuits until Malcolm explained it to him, she almost fell out of her chair laughing. Inwardly, however, she became even more curious about his identity. Not having a method to create them was natural, but not knowing of their existence in general was mysterious. No matter how many topics they spoke about throughout the past few months, his past was never one of them. The two had grown much closer over this period of time. Especially with them essentially becoming roommates, they spoke to each other constantly. Sometimes they would get close enough for even they themselves to suspect their relationship before awkwardly brushing it off. Neither of them dared to bring up the topic. They had only known each other for around 6 months in total, which was hypothetically more than enough time for something to develop, but with neither of them saying anything, their relationship slowly became filled with palpable tension. This tension wasn't bad, though. They just had moments where they would become awkward around each other and act like normal teenagers, blushing and unable to make eye contact. His relationship with Catherine wasn't even close to the only thing he had improved over the past 4 months. His control over lightning had seen a drastic rise after he gained an expert like Malcolm as a teacher. He even developed a fun ability where he could call down lightning from the sky to smite his opponents, the same one that Malcolm had used on him during their first meeting. Though the scale was much smaller when Damien used it, the ominous black color of his lightning also carried different properties than Malcolm's crimson kind, making the effects differ. None of these were the greatest improvements, however, as Damien's main focus wasn't there. Rather, it was on his mana circuits. Unlike his original plan, it took almost 3 months to complete the corporeal structure he had created. After his mana heart was finished, he spent 2 months completing the intricate system he built that covered his neck down to his toes. This system was honestly a work of art. Thin purple strands now layered Damien's entire internal body, as rather than a circulatory system as he had originally planned, he structured it more like a nervous system. And nerves were much more intricate than arteries. They snaked through his body, coiling around each other and forming patterns as they filled his body. 8 quadrants made up this system, 1 for each extremity and 4 for his torso alone. He figured that there'd be times when he'd be run through, and he couldn't have the whole upper body portion of his mana circuits be jeopardized by that. Another change he made was his heart. After extensive thought, he connected his physical heart with his mana heart to stabilize the mana circuit's position within his internal body. Now, they had become a true part of him. When his body evolved, they'd evolve along with it, and like Legos, they could be taken apart and put back together as he pleased. The final month he spent on his corporeal circuits was when he made another drastic decision. He decided to link his brain to the system as well, creating a feedback loop that spanned every part of his body. Since he didn't want to end up brain dead, he took 2 weeks studying its functions before even attempting this step. This part was by far the most dangerous, as he had to put his complete focus on every movement he made. That week, he wasn't even able to move an inch from his spot on the mountain. When Damien finished, a faint purple hue seemed to emanate from his skin as his newly created meridians shone. They weren't the same meridians that cultivators had, but he named them like that anyway. And once that was done, Damien began working on the ethereal system. Once this system was finished, it would be anchored to its corporeal counterpart to complete his mana circuits. This process was much easier for him than the previous one. Creating the corporeal circuit was like creating a new body part, altering the base structure of his body. But the ethereal portion was similar to comprehending his affinities. He drew the pathway in his mind and focused on the concept he wanted to imbue in them. He only had to trace the already existing parallel within his body. As he formed these ethereal circuits, his mind wandered to various forms of destruction. Nuclear explosions that instantly incinerated hundreds of thousands of lives, and the nuclear winter that reaped those who survived. The collision of celestial bodies that formed planets and galaxies, and even more complex forms of destruction like mental breakdowns and wrath. All these thoughts of destruction fueled his creation as an ethereal reddish-black construct formed within his body. He started from his lower extremities and worked his way up, purposefully evading his mana heart as he built. And then, on the final day of its creation, he linked the core of his ethereal circuits to his mana heart. In that instant, the world lit up, and Damien could swear he heard something akin to a car engine revving. His body emitted a blinding amethyst glow as mana began cycling through the circuits he had set up. Badum badum. His mana heart started beating as it pumped mana through every part of his body. Since it was connected to his actual heart, it functioned in a similar fashion. There were also benefits to connecting to his brain. Damien felt euphoria as the mana in his body followed the pathways he created as he flicked a casual bolt of lightning to test his gains. It was instant. Not only was there not even a microsecond of delay between his thoughts and actions, but the power of that simple flick was also enough to drill a small hole into the ground. Damien almost leapt with joy. He honestly couldn't see anyone defeating him now, but he quickly calmed himself by thinking about how Malcolm toyed with him all those months ago. That's right. My strength has been optimized and slightly amplified, but it hasn't been raised an insane amount. I need to keep my wits and not get conceited. And as he brought himself down from his momentary high, another unexpected event took place. A system window popped up in front of his eyes. You have begun pioneering a new realm of mana circuits. Although many have built them in either corporeal or ethereal form, very few have chosen to interconnect both. As your path continues, you might even be able to unlock mysteries pertaining to the soul. Through this monumental achievement, your legends have been enhanced. Your mana circuits have been listed as a new trait. You have been granted the trait, Ananta Matrix. Your legends have been enhanced. Damien's eyes widened. It seemed the system truly was omnipresent. It had even realized the grand intent he had behind the creation of his mana circuits and granted him rewards based on it. He had no idea what the Ananta Matrix was or what it had to do with his mana circuits, but for it to be classified as a trait, it had to be good. All he had to do was continue forward as he always did. As he finished up, Damien got up and stretched. It had been 5 months since he'd last seen Zara, and he was curious what she was up to. During these 5 months, they had communicated constantly through their mental connection, and Damien could feel that Zara's thoughts had become more coherent. Even though she couldn't speak yet, her thoughts were basically complete sentences, rather than the bundles of emotion he had received when they first initiated their pact. The Beast territory wasn't far from the Zenith Academy, as it was situated in a place easily accessible by all races. Damien didn't understand why it was necessary to be close to the Beast domain as well, since beasts without their fourth class couldn't take human form, but he had learned from Malcolm that it was a sign of goodwill. After all, if the Academy was in the center of every race's domain besides the beasts, what kind of message would it give off? Anyway, Zara had traveled to the Beast domain during the first month that Damien had been training, and had spent her time there evolving. Although the inner areas of the Beast domain were developed and not much different from human territories, there were plenty of beasts that preferred roaming free and hunting as it was truest to their nature. This was even more so for second-class beasts as their intelligence was still budding. Zara was a special case, and Damien mused it was due to her bloodline that her intelligence had been high enough for her to understand his words when they were mere first classes. Now that their preparation period had ended, Damien called her back. He didn't mind being separated if he was stationary, but with him going to the tournament, he couldn't bear being too far. Zara shared this sentiment. The two had been together through many rough experiences and had forged a bond thicker than even blood. Regardless of anything, if someone asked Damien who the person he was closest to in the world was, it would undoubtedly be Zara. Damien warped back to his house and had his nightly dinner with Catherine as they excitedly talked about various things. However, the topic for today was mainly on the upcoming Nexus event. After all, its start was merely a week away. Chapter 50, Prelude 2. The next morning, Damien and Catherine were summoned by their respective teachers for a meeting. With the Nexus event rapidly approaching, it was time for them to make preparations and leave. The event's location would change every time, and this year it was being held in the human domain. Due to this, they only had to leave now. Most people from the various other domains in the world had already started making their way towards the venue. As they arrived in front of the disciplinary building where they were summoned, they saw 3 other students waiting, 2 girls and a boy. The 5 of them waited in silence for a few minutes before the doors to the building opened. Out of those doors came their teachers. "Good. The 5 of you have been officially titled as Supreme Geniuses from our academy and will be representing us in the event," said Malcolm, who was at the forefront of the group. The other 4 quickly bowed to him, while Damien simply nodded his head. Malcolm and Damien shared a more casual relationship than most teachers and students since both of them liked to banter and make fun of each other, so Malcolm didn't mind the seemingly disrespectful behavior. "All right, I'll do all the explaining on the road for now. Let's leave." Malcolm let out a shrill whistle. Instantly, 2 flying beasts arrived in the sky above the group. One looked awfully similar to a griffon while the other was more reptilian, seemingly a subspecies of wyverns. However, when the group was about to mount the beasts, both beasts entered a slightly panicked state. Their bodies shivered as their heads lowered to the ground. Everyone was flabbergasted until they witnessed a large shadow cover the sky above them. The shadow started changing shape, and in its place stood a wolf the size of a 2-story building with beautiful black wings. Looking down at the other beasts in contempt, the wolf let out a prideful howl. "Awuwo." This caused the 2 beasts to shrink back even further, unable to even move properly due to their fear. Seeing this scene, the group became weary and took battle stances. Well, all but 2 of them. Damien and Catherine simply smiled at each other before Damien walked forward. All right, you've made your grand entrance so you can stop now. Can't you see that you're scaring the others?" The wolf looked at Damien and snorted, but still came down obediently. Reaching the ground, It shrunk down to the size of a normal human and rushed towards Damien. Damien greeted it with a hug. This wolf was obviously Zara, who had gone through large transformations since Damien had last seen her. Besides her size, the aura she gave off was much more overbearing, and her eyes now held a hint of silver. Damien smiled as he felt Zara's excited emotions. "Yeah, I missed you too, but we have all the time in the world to catch up. For now, let's just get moving, all right." Looking at the rest of the group that was staring at him, Damien raised his brow. "What? Are we leaving, or are you just going to keep staring at me?" They soon snapped out of their dazes. Out of these people, the only other person who knew of Zara's existence besides him and Catherine was Malcolm. Even if he hadn't seen her when they first met, how could he miss the wolf in Damien's shadow while he was observing him? If he did, wouldn't he be disqualified from being a fourth class? Well, I guess Damien has his own ride, so the rest of us have more space. There were no more disruptions as the group got mounted the other two beasts and took flight. Catherine had unceremoniously climbed atop Zara, though, and Zara didn't have problems with this. She and Catherine were very close to the point of being called friends, and so Catherine became the only person other than Damien that Zara would allow on her back. Damien rolled his eyes at this but said nothing, instead opting to ask Malcolm for information. "Hey, old man, tell us about the Nexus event now that we're already on the way." The other three students were baffled by the fact that Damien called the headmaster so casually, but before any of them could make a fool of themselves, Malcolm responded. "Calm down, brat, I'm getting to it. The Nexus event changes its structure every year but has a base concept that remains consistent. The first event will always be a comprehension test to weed out those who don't even qualify to be considered above average." Malcolm smiled, seeing the surprised look on the students' faces before continuing. "However, don't be fooled by this. There will still be thousands of people who pass this phase. After that, it's a point-based event. There will be 3 rounds that weed out the competitors until only the top 12 remain. After that is the main event, which is a normal single-elimination tournament." Damien felt his anticipation grow after hearing this explanation. Normal tournament arcs always bored him, as fighting 1v1 over and over again can become monotonous. Events like this were more to his preference. "I'm sure you all know the prizes for the top 3, but there are also various smaller prizes for those who place in the top 10, along with the entry to the secret realm that's granted to the top 50. The other important aspect is the connections you should make." Malcolm became slightly more serious as he spoke. "As future powerhouses of our world, it's important that you make strong ties to those in your generation. Regardless of race or opinions, you should attempt to remain friendly. Naturally, I won't force you to like everyone, but keep my advice in mind. We can't have a repeat of what happened 1,000 years ago." Malcolm's words turned the atmosphere solemn. Damien also remembered something he had once deemed as a flag but forgotten due to his training. "Old man, can you tell me more about the Great War? In my defense, you made me skip my classes so I didn't learn anything." Malcolm rolled his eyes. This kid was truly too ignorant, but it was his job as a teacher to fix that, so he carefully explained. "The Great War that took place 1,000 years ago was an unprecedented tragedy for our world. Many nations and powerhouses alike fell. Even a demigod ended up dying due to this war. His name was Kurt Galloway, and he was the one who created the training grounds in our academy." Damien's eyes widened. Kurt was the reason he was still alive today, as, without the subspace in the dungeon, he would have long fallen victim to the wyvern of the 40th floor. The fact that he had reached demigod level was a shock in itself, but for him to die in that battle was even more shocking. That war is the reason all races in this world love in relative harmony. Due to the racism and segregation at the time, it became much easier for enemies to pick them off one by one. As for who that enemy is, it was a race called Nox. Even those who had knowledge of the war had their interests piqued. The Nox were always mentioned as the perpetrators, but nothing else about them was made known. Malcolm nodded. Since you are all on the path to becoming important figures in the future, it isn't hard for me to tell you. The Nox are a race from a distant star somewhere in the universe, and their power far exceeds our own. Malcolm sighed as he continued. We still don't know their purpose for invasion or even their home planet since we have been forced into a defensive position. When the Nox invaded 1,000 years ago, it started the Great War. They had 3 demigod-level beings among them while we only had 1, and their fourth classes were uncountable. Due to the many deaths they sustained during the invasion, there were few fourth-class beings alive today. This was all Malcolm said before he changed the topic. You will learn more as you gain power and rise in rank. For now, this is enough. Focus on what's ahead of you rather than things that will not matter until the far future. A heavy silence descended after this, as everyone was in their own thoughts. Damien was still thinking about the Nox. Otherworldly invaders, huh? As I thought, this is probably a flag. The Earth is also nearby, so it isn't certain that it won't be targeted. Although I don't care much about the world itself, there are still things I care about there. I need to return quickly after I gain enough power. Damien shook off his depressing thoughts. As Malcolm said, these were all things that would only matter in the future. For now, Damien just wanted to have fun in the Nexus event, obtain first place and get the elixir, and then explore the secret realm. That's right, everything else comes later. Who knows, by the time I have to deal with an invasion, I might even be powerful enough to wipe the floor with them. As he cheered himself up, a smile returned to his face. Besides his own internal pep talk, he also had 2 others who sensed his emotional state. Zara was mentally communicating her cheers, while Catherine was gently holding his hand. Damien's smile became gentle. Damn, it's kinda nice to have people around me who care, huh? The week passed by in a flash, as the group arrived at a massive arena-like structure. It was time for the Nexus event to commence. Chapter 51, Prelude 3. Aperon was structured in a very classic manner. There was the human domain, the massive Helia forest, and many smaller domains existing between them. The structures of these domains were also simple. Within the human domain there were 5 empires, namely the Adelaire, Stanton, Lennon, Wolford, and Gerard empires. While they had minor power struggles, their overall balance was always maintained due to each having a separate specialization. Each empire had 4 major clans below their royal family, and many smaller clans and families below them. This was in accordance with an agreement made, so the balance between them wouldn't crumble. The Adelaire Empire was the strongest and largest of the 5 empires. It covered the majority of the central area of the human domain, consisting of many mountainous and grassy plain regions. The Stanton and Lennon empires were situated in the far north and south, with the Stanton Empire in a massive, snow-covered flatland and the Lennon Empire closer to the sun. This led to cultural development, where the Stanton Empire became similar to Eskimos, and the Lennon Empire adopted a more traditional Eastern culture. Meanwhile, the Wolford and Gerard empires were on the east and west of the human domain. The Wolford Empire was surrounded by forests and mainly specialized in hunting, with their culture revolving around this concept as well. The Gerard Empire was by the boundless sea that surrounded the entire massive continent that made up Aperon. They naturally focused on sea trade and exports. The boundless sea essentially made the entire continent into a giant island, and many people had wondered whether there could be other continents or landmasses floating within it, but nobody had ever explored the entire sea to find out. It was too expansive for even a 4th class to cover it, and even in space, it would take a large amount of time to circle the entire planet to explore. Perhaps some demigods who ascended to the heavenly world knew the truth, but it was never shared with anyone else. The Helia Forest was home to both the Beast Domain and the Elven Domain, as both coexisted and shared the land. The Helia Forest alone took up around 1/3 of the space on the entire continent, so the 2 races weren't cramped for space. The Elven Domain was ruled by the Kyria royal family and didn't follow the same system of clans and smaller powers as the human domain. Elves were typically more united as a race due to their nature and didn't tend to enjoy conflict. However, this didn't mean they couldn't fight. Elves were always known as a peaceful race, leading many ambitious people in the past to attempt to conquer them, but this was a terrible idea. When they were forced to enter battle, the usual peace-loving elves became bloodthirsty war gods. The duality of their nature was never explained, as nobody dared to ask, but once it became known, nobody wantonly picked fights with them. This demeanor only came forth in life or death battles or moments of extreme stress, making many people wonder if it was controllable or a subconscious defense mechanism. The beast domain was also ruled by a royal family, but not much was known about them. They tended to stay secluded within their domain and watch over their subjects. While the various other ruling class individuals knew their names and strengths, it was never disclosed to the common populace. Beasts weren't the only ones living in their domain, though, as demihumans also chose to make their home there. Demihumans were the product of a union between beasts and other races, and were shunned heavily before the Great War. This was due to some more disgusting individuals mating with beasts before they received their human forms to produce children. This kind of practice was extremely frowned upon. Until a beast gained its human form, it was absolutely forbidden to mate with them for obvious reasons. Nowadays, the discrimination isn't as high, as many demihumans are born from demihuman parents, but their race still decided to stay within the beast domain as it had been their home for many years. In the Nexus event, the beast domain's participants were usually demihumans, as beasts who fit the age range were usually unable to verbally speak. This was a requirement as well that was set so there wouldn't be any misunderstandings during the tournament. The final major domain within Aperin was the dwarves' domain. The interesting fact about them, however, was that they lived underground. Dwarves were a race of scientists and blacksmiths who naturally preferred heat to the point that they built their empire close to the molten core of the planet. The royal dwarf lineage was called the Temur family, and with their citizens, they built a massive underground empire that spanned roughly the same distance as the Adelaire Empire of the human domain. Dwarves were naturally weaker in combat due to their smaller physiques, but it wasn't that they didn't hold power, or rather, their power couldn't be mobilized offensively. Their strength usually came from artifacts and technology that they invented. For this reason, they tended not to participate in the Nexus event, but they still attended it. They could both sell artifacts to gather more raw material and form connections and long-term business relationships with the major empires on the surface. Their intelligence was their strong suit, and business was almost a natural instinct to them. All of these various races and various powers were now congregating in a single spot that Damien was gazing upon at this very moment. It was a massive arena that seemed capable of housing hundreds of thousands of people, and on its exterior, countless massive screens showcased the view within to those who couldn't enter. Damien didn't understand how such a massive event that would have thousands of participants could efficiently be hosted within such an enclosed space, but his doubts were soon answered. Within the arena, he could sense countless spatial fluctuations emanating from various spots, seemingly holding subspaces to host the events. Most likely, those screens he saw earlier were going to be used to broadcast what was happening to the spectators. Damien followed Malcolm into an elevator-like structure that took their group to a huge penthouse that overlooked the entire arena. Within this penthouse, there were various figures already gathered. On a raised platform, 9 people sat together with grand auras emanating from their bodies. They were 7 men and 2 women, the leaders of the various nations of the world. The 7 men were the 5 emperors of the human domain, the dwarf king, and the beast emperor, while the 2 women were the elf queen and the beast empress. The human domain was largely patriarchal and the elven domain matriarchal, while the beast domain was ruled by the emperor and empress, who wielded equal authority. The dwarf domain's ruling was based on mastery of their craft, so the gender of their ruler was always subject to change. The geniuses of this year's competition sure are interesting, the beast emperor said. Indeed, I see you've brought an especially talented youth this year. The Lenin Emperor, Jonas Lenin, said. Yes, the Elf Queen chimed in. Not just the demi-human kid, but also that girl from the human domain isn't bad. Those from the Zenith Academy still haven't shown up. I heard they have many good seedlings this time around. The Dwarf King added. The fourth-class beings that stood at the top of the world conversed lightly as they waited for the event to start. At this time, Damien's group arrived at the penthouse. All eyes turned on them for a second as silence reigned. Then, as if nothing happened, everyone went back to their conversations. "Come on," Malcolm said with a smile. "Time to make your debut into the world." Damien and the others followed. In their group, Damien and Catherine were the only humans, with one of the girls being a demi-human and the other boy and girl being a pair of elven twins. The diversity of their group was unintentional but still gave off a good impression. The Academy was prided for being unbiased, so having too many people of a single race would raise brows whether their qualifications were fair or not. The group walked through the room and reached the elevated platform. It was common courtesy to greet these emperors and empresses before moving on to anything else. Malcolm only gave a slight nod as a greeting, being an individual on their level, while the rest bowed. "We greet seniors," the others said in unison. This time, Damien also followed the same customs. He could be as wild as he pleased in front of Malcolm, but these were beings who could toy with him as they pleased that he didn't know. Offending them on accident would take his life far earlier than he'd like. His bow was still not as low as the rest, though. Maybe it was a matter of pride or maybe it was a matter of habit. Damien didn't know. All he knew was that the only people he'd ever bowed before were his mother and his teacher. He didn't enjoy giving his respect to people who hadn't done anything to earn it. Receiving affirmation from the leaders, the group raised their heads. The first to speak was the Beast Empress. "You boy, what is that girl doing in your shadow?" Damien was surprised at first but quickly calmed down. How could Zara even think to hide from fourth-class beings? However, she still prided herself on her concealment. Seeing that she was discovered so easily, she warily glared at the Beast Empress without leaving his shadow. Her boldness only existed when she was in her safe space. I apologize for her rudeness, Senior. It's just that she doesn't really enjoy crowds and tends to find comfort there, though I have no idea why." The Beast Empress smiled. "You must have gone through many life or death situations together. You're around the same age too, so it isn't surprising that she'd get attached to you." Eh? Damien didn't know how old Zara was, but finding out that they were of similar age truly surprised him. Considering her behavior when they first met, he thought she was much younger. As Damien was thinking of how to respond, he noticed a fierce gaze on him. Looking over, he saw a large pink-haired man with ruby eyes on one of the central thrones. Pink hair? Damien slowly became drenched in a cold sweat. He and Catherine were standing shoulder to shoulder as opposed to everyone else who had a healthy amount of distance between them. Sneakily glancing at her, he once again saw the pink hair and ruby eyes under Catherine's disguise. His cold sweat intensified as he covertly took 2 steps to the side, putting a comfortable distance between him and Catherine. Fuck, she was a princess this entire time. Chapter 52, Start 1. Damien's actions were hardly noticeable, but that didn't mean nobody saw him. Both his sneaky look towards Catherine and his slight movement to create distance were clear as day to those fourth-class beings that were observing him. This both amused them and piqued their curiosity. With their strength, it was normal that they could see through Catherine's disguise and witness the pink hair and ruby eyes under the black-haired, brown-eyed facade. But for a boy that was still at second class to do so was a different story. Now all their gazes were focused on Damien, and even the Adelaire Emperor's fierce gaze held a hint of admiration. But none of them brought it up. It was one thing for the boy who looked extremely close to her to notice, but her identity was hidden for a reason. Meanwhile, Damien was silently praying that the matter would be glossed over. Although he previously said he had a clue about her status, he at most thought she'd be from one of the major clans of one of the empires, not a legitimate princess. But it's not like it affected his view of their relationship. He didn't have respect for status. He only respected strength and character. If he likes her, he'd like her regardless. Still, standing in front of her fourth-class father made him act slightly more respectful. Boy, I know that little girl in your shadow seems awfully attached to you, but be aware that she can't participate in the tournament. How about you leave her with me instead? The Beast Empress said, changing the topic. Damien was caught off guard. Leave Zara with a stranger. He would never even consider it. Even Zara was filled with apprehension at this thought. Beasts evolved through their bloodlines, which increased along with their strength. Every beast had the slightest amount of god-beast blood within them, and as they grew in class, this bloodline became more potent. They had two options for evolution. Either they follow the steps of their ancestors and become true god-beasts themselves through their bloodlines, or they assimilate other strong bloodlines to create their own new variation and carve their own path. Each path had its own merits and demerits. While following the footsteps of their latent bloodlines was easier, it would limit their potential to the level their ancestors reached. Although they could progress farther, it could be incredibly difficult to do so. On the other hand, forging a unique bloodline was a terrifyingly difficult path in its own right. It would take much longer for a beast to evolve into a god beast no matter how much they leveled up. However, their potential would be limitless. If they forged their path without stopping, they could possibly reach a peak above the peak. Zara was a beast with an incredibly unique bloodline, and Damien had sensed this even from their first meeting. His beast half also had the potential to make him into a god beast, but Zara's bloodline wasn't helpful for that. But that didn't mean that other beasts wouldn't covet her bloodline. He had seen a prime example of this through the wyvern on the 40th floor. It spent months chasing her for her bloodline, even throwing away its pride and leaving its nest to capture her. Due to this, Damien couldn't help but become wary. He knew he couldn't do anything to these fourth-class beings, but if any of them wanted to take Zara away from him for their own selfish intentions, he'd use his life to make sure it didn't happen. After all, he designed a hidden function in his mana circuits, specifically for a situation where he was fated to die either way. Damien's body started leaning forward as he adopted a defensive posture, and his feral bestial aura slightly radiated. If it was to protect Zara, he didn't care enough to control his bestial instinct. His best fighting state was when it was in control. Seeing this, the Beast Empress smiled helplessly. She realized that the boy in front of her knew the secrets of beast evolution and doubted her intentions. She was also extremely surprised. She didn't sense it before, but the boy seemed to be a demi-human. The curious thing was that he didn't radiate an aura of someone who was born a demi-human, but rather of a progenitor of whatever his bloodline was. An evolver. Once the thought struck her, she couldn't get it out of her head. If this boy was truly a human who achieved perfect evolution, his potential was much greater than she originally thought. Okay, no need to get protective. It was simply a suggestion. However, when this event ends, you should come visit us in the beast domain. We'd welcome you with open arms. The others in the group couldn't hold back their shock. The only one who had an idea of what was going on was the Beast Emperor, who shook his head with a helpless expression on his face. This wife of his always seemed to do whatever she wanted without consulting anyone about it. Damien slightly relaxed, realizing that he had accidentally revealed a secret of his. Well, no need to fret over it. She doesn't have any hostile intention, so perhaps this could be another opportunity for me. As they continued interacting, the arena slowly filled up until maximum capacity. Not only that, the land surrounding the arena was packed for miles with a crowd of people. Suddenly, a booming voice rang out. Welcome everyone to the 100th anniversary Nexus event. There are plenty of exciting games that will have you sitting on the edge of your seat, so be prepared and be excited. The crowd roared with cheers and applause as the announcer continued. The comprehension event has already been concluded, so it's about time we move on to the main event. This year we have 3,000 geniuses from across the world participating, so without further ado, Let me introduce our first stage. Damien was a little confused, but his doubts were instantly answered by Malcolm, who was standing beside him. The comprehension event is to weed out the weak people who won't stand a chance in the main competition. Why would those in this room who have already been declared as supreme geniuses need to go through that selection process? Nodding his head, Damien continued to listen to the announcer. For the 100th anniversary of the Nexus event, our leaders have gone all out in the preparations. For our first event, a fan favorite and a classic, survival games. The audience roared once more. It seems survival games truly was a fan favorite. The screens around the arena lit up as scenes of mountains, rivers, deserts, and plains began displaying. There was even a region filled with lava. This is our arena for the first game. A small world filled with various terrain for our many participants to choose from. The rules are simple. This game will last for an entire week, and the goal is to survive. The competitors will be given a bracelet artifact before they enter that will track their position at all times. Losing your bracelet means you're disqualified, and having someone else's bracelet gains you a point, even if you got it by stealing from the person who originally disqualified them. Each day, the space within the small realm will shrink, so you don't have to worry about a boring match where everyone stays hidden. Teaming is allowed, and cheating will not be disallowed unless it's reported, so if you have that idea, don't get caught. Now, all our competitors come to the stage. As the announcer finished, Malcolm smiled. This is your time. Go out there, shine bright, and make sure your name resounds across the entire continent. Bright fires were lit in everyone's eyes. The thought of glory was enticing, and their whole purpose was to show their worth. Down below, the 2950 normal participants were already in place. The only ones remaining were the 50 supreme geniuses in the penthouse. While it may seem that the supreme geniuses will easily win and take all 50 top spots, that had never been the case. There was more to the event than just strength, and one's wits and tactics were also put to the test. Every decade, countless underdogs rise from the ranks of the normal competitors and claim their spots among the top 50 or even the top 10. It was these stories that motivated those that couldn't be titled supreme geniuses to continue competing. Damien entered a small teleport formation with the rest of the geniuses that took them directly to the center of the field. Once there, they were immediately handed their bracelets, which they promptly put on. Damien basked in the cheers of the audience. His blood pumped and his mana danced as his excitement grew for what was to come. A battle of strength, a battle of wits, a battle of status. Damien didn't care for its form. As long as it was battle, it made his blood boil. He wasn't the only one feeling this. Catherine was standing by his side, basking in the same emotions as the announcer spoke once again. Now the time you've all been waiting for, let the battle. The arena became silent as anticipation bubbled. Damien suddenly felt a soft punch from his side. Looking over, he saw Catherine flashing him an enchanting smile. See you on the other side. Damien smiled back as he felt the light of teleportation swallow him. That's right, let's see who wins at the end. As the participants started disappearing from the platform, the announcer's words finally fell. Begin. Chapter 53, Survival Games 1. When Damien opened his eyes, he was in the middle of a large flatland. He immediately activated his vector field as an attack headed his way. It was a line of earth spikes that would have caught any normal person off guard and immediately eliminated them. But Damien wasn't a normal person. When the earth spikes were within range, they were suddenly crushed under their own weight and dissipated. When he turned to look in the direction the attack came from, he saw a skinny man with panic in his eyes. Damien didn't even pay attention to this man, directly teleporting past him and making his way out of the flatlands. The man was confused as to why the kid he had attacked didn't retaliate, but he didn't get the chance to think farther as spatial light covered him and removed him from the small realm. Damien easily took the bracelet of the man as he passed by. He mused that even though the man made it past the comprehension test, he was in the lowest tier of people competing. Killing was strictly forbidden within this competition, but severe injury of any kind was permitted. Due to this, Damien didn't spend too much time on weaklings. If he saw one, he'd quickly eliminate them. His targets were the other supreme geniuses and maybe the hidden tigers who had entered normally. It was below him to bully those weaker than him in a friendly competition. This wasn't a life or death battlefield where slaughter was his best option. He moved quickly and efficiently as the flatlands slowly began sloping into a mountainous region. This was where Damien would hunt for the next day before he measured the rate of shrinking of the small realm. Artifacts were also banned for the first phases of the tournament, leaving Damien with only his fists as weapons. This toolie was put in place to guarantee fairness in that people won't move further in the competition by simply relying on their status and wealth. This was another reason why dwarves never participated in the event. Artifacts were their main strength, so the rules were against them even if it was done so unintentionally. Though artifacts would be reintroduced into the event at later stages. This rule left Damien with a smaller arsenal of tricks up his sleeve, but he wasn't defenseless. His body was always his strongest point, and he had developed a solid level of destructive power through his affinities while training with Malcolm. His sword art was useless, but there was still one move he could use. Bladeless was designed in such a way that even his arm could be used as a blade. He could also mimic the effects of spatial collapse simply with his spatial magic, but the damage was much smaller. On his way up the mountain, Damien encountered many weaker participants who didn't even notice as their bracelets were stolen. Sadly, he wasn't able to find anyone who could truly fight him. Nevertheless, Damien continued on, hoping to find a worthy opponent soon. In a huge desert spanning the majority of the west side of the small realm, Catherine was having a much more fun time than Damien. With the desert being relatively flat beside the various sand dunes strewn along its surface, the participants within it were engaged in a small battle royale. Catherine quickly joined this battle and started amassing points. Similar to Damien, she felt it was below her to bully the weak, so she simply used illusions to manipulate them, grabbing their bracelets while they assumed nobody was around them. When this didn't work, she would shoot compressed air bullets that instantly knocked out most of her opponents, granting her more points. As she continued this cycle, she ran into a human youth that blocked her path. He pulled out a table, 2 chairs, and a tea set. "Miss Hart, why don't you put away your hostility so the two of us can have a chat over tea?" the youth said while scanning her with a lewd gaze. Catherine immediately felt disgusted. She knew who this youth was. His name was Evan Lockhart, one of the supreme geniuses from the Stanton Empire. Even within the penthouse where all the geniuses were mingling, he was constantly attempting to woo the female geniuses. None of them gave him the time of day with him, not even attempting to conceal his indecent intentions. It was obvious that certain people didn't choose their participants based on character, but only strength. Without a single word, Catherine flicked her wrist as a massive sword made of wind flew towards Evan, however. He just smiled and lightly stepped out of its path, allowing it to decimate the table he was previously sitting at. My, he exclaimed, "it appears that you're quite the feisty one. Well, no matter, tamming your type is my favorite pastime." As he spoke, the earth around him began to vibrate. The Stanton Empire was known for its talented earth affinity users, so the element didn't surprise Catherine. If it was 6 months ago, she'd slightly panic about how to deal with the present situation. After all, neither her wind nor illusion affinities were effective counters for earth. But now, she didn't even bat an eye at what Evan was doing. This confrontation was naturally witnessed by the countless spectators within the arena. Within the cacophony of cheers and boos, the announcer's voice rang clear. "Here we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Our first confrontation between supreme geniuses is about to begin. Place your bets at the betting booth and see if you can win big." Many people were already headed to the booths before the announcer's words even fell. The betting booths were a way to enhance the audience's experience during the tournament. It was both a way to make money and support their favorite competitors. Although they couldn't hear what was being said within the small realm arena, the audience could clearly see Evan's lewd stare and Catherine's evident disgust through the projection. The women in the audience and quite a few of the men didn't like this type of disgusting character, and so they immediately put bets on Catherine, while those of the Stanton Empire were the majority of those who bet on Evan. The Stanton Emperor sighed helplessly as he received more than a few sidelong glances from the others around him. You know how the world works. Strength speaks louder than character. Besides that, his family is one of our 4 major clans. Even if I decided to reject, there would have been a large uproar over my decision. He was right. Although it wasn't too exaggerated on the surface, the world truly was one where strength is king. The one with the bigger fist could twist things as they pleased as the losers wallowed in self-pity. Meanwhile, Catherine's first major clash of the Nexus event finally began. She concentrated wind below her feet and retreated to a distance while constantly firing air bullets and wind blades in Evan's direction. These were all met by earth walls. Although they could mitigate the damage from the wind blades, the bullets were specifically built for penetration. Holes began forming in the earth walls, forcing Evan to dodge. He stomped his foot on the ground, resulting in a disruption of the sand he was standing on. The sand billowed out in waves as it attempted to swallow Catherine. Even though it was a rare subset, sand was still within the boundary of Earth, making it something those with immense control over their affinity could manipulate. Being a supreme genius, Evan met this standard of control. Sensing danger from the wave of sand, Catherine used her propulsion to fly above its range, creating massive gusts of wind that threw the environment into a flurry. But to everyone watching, it was clear that she was on the losing end. Evan was in an environment that perfectly suited his abilities, allowing him to gain the upper hand. Realizing this, Catherine went on a full offensive. Her speed increased 5-fold, making her figure blur as she darted around the battlefield. From every direction, countless bullets and swords of compressed wind rained down. Only about a third of them were real, though. Evan clicked his tongue. He knew that Catherine possessed an illusion affinity, but he was still forced to defend against every attack, not knowing which were real or fake. Catherine's new strategy was wholly focused on explosive power. Each bullet that hit the ground caused a massive eruption of sand, clouding the atmosphere and hiding her position as she continued her assault. "Damn it," Evan cursed as he became annoyed. With another stomp of his foot, he increased the gravity around him in hopes of dragging her to the ground, but this was the wrong choice. The increased gravity accelerated Catherine's attacks and made their power even more explosive as they crashed into the ground. Evan was flung backward as he coughed blood. His gravity control was still in its beta phase, so he didn't know the specifics of how it worked. The only reason he used it was in hopes that it would slow her down, and in truth, it did. Catherine slammed into the ground as her assault came to a pause. Without warning, several earth spikes emerged around her, cutting off her escape routes. The power of these spikes vastly outstripped the ones Damien deflected earlier, posing a serious threat to Catherine. Since she just plummeted to the ground and had yet to recover, she wasn't able to put up a proper defense or counter. It was clear that she had lost this match. The audience was on the edge of their seat, paying rapt attention to see if Catherine could work her way out of this perilous situation when all of a sudden, clap! A resounding clap was heard, followed by a huge shockwave that even disrupted the viewing devices slightly, causing static to form for a split second before it returned to normal. When the screens came back on, the scene in front of them left the audience stumped. Gone were the residual effects of battle, gone were the massive walls of earth and waves of sand, and gone was Catherine, who was previously stuck in a perilous situation. In front of them was Evan, who had blood leaking from his ears and a horrified look on his face, and behind him stood Catherine. Nobody could make heads or tails out of the situation besides a few powerhouses who had noticed from the start. A voice rang out in the stands. It was all an illusion, causing a tidal wave of discussions to erupt. Catherine watched with a malicious grin as Evan fell to the ground unconscious. Grabbing his bracelet off his wrist, she spoke. On to the next target. Chapter 54, Survival Games 2. 3 days passed in a flash as the games continued. Within every area of the small realm, there were constant battles taking place, with every participant trying their hardest to prove themselves. By this point, the realm had shrunk to nearly half its original size, but it wasn't a linear decrease. It seemed that, as the final day drew closer, exponential amounts of land were removed from the playing field. This removal of land was accompanied by a visible fog filled with spatial attribute that teleported anyone it touched out of the realm, effectively disqualifying them. Out of the 3,000 original participants, only 2,200 remained, and there were still 4 days left in the week. These 4 days would be even more brutal as the area shrunk and battles became more prominent. The audience outside mostly hadn't moved from their spots during this time, watching with rapt attention for any intense battles that would occur. Still, sleep was necessary for people without high ranks, so there were recordings available of the most important battles that people could purchase. There was also a leaderboard present that showcased the top 50 participants, based on the points they gained in real time. Catherine's fight in the desert was one of them. By this point, she had left the vicinity of the desert area and entered the oceanic landscape. She encountered many foes and accumulated enough points to reach the top of the leaderboard, even defeating another supreme genius from the elven domain. She was excited to see that these people titled as supreme geniuses could give her good fights, but she knew that the best had yet to come. In this manner, she continued moving forward. Damien had spent these 3 days in the mountainous region defeating anyone he saw. It was honestly smooth sailing for him so far. He had yet to run into a single supreme genius, and most of the normal participants couldn't even notice him taking their bracelets. Feeling bored of this continuous routine, he decided to switch things up. He stopped using his rush strategy to accumulate points, and instead stopped aiming for points altogether and used the tournament to train. Every time he came across another participant, he'd play as a weakling and battle it out with them, but he never truly attacked. Instead, he trained his ability to dodge and counter. As a spatial affinity user, he always relied on teleporting to dodge. And while his instincts were sharp as is, he wanted to train his body reflexes to reach the same level. After all, he could very well run into opponents that could read his teleportation path, making it useless. Like this, he gained a ton of battle experience, and his reflexes slowly improved. In the beginning, he was hit countless times by various elemental attacks, but none of them could get past his bodily defenses, so he remained uninjured. As he traversed the forest, Damien finally ran into an opponent he could consider as strong, with his senses telling him he'd receive a good fight. It was a young man from the Lenin Empire who stood regally as if everything was beneath him. When Damien approached, the young man raised his brow before grinning. "Oh, what do we have here?" Damien rolled his eyes. "Shut up and fight me already. Stop acting like a pretentious brat." The youth became incensed, but he soon controlled his emotions as his grin widened. Well, as someone who holds the title of Supreme Genius, isn't it bullying for you to face me on an even playing field? Let's spice things up, shall we? A long katana-like sword appeared in his hand. Even if one only took a brief glance, it was clear that the sword was an artifact. This was blatant cheating. Even the crowd outside started yelling and booing, forcing the announcer to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have to remember the rules. Cheaters can only be disqualified if a participant reports them for it. Unless his opponent says anything, we are bound by the rules." It was truly an ingenious strategy. With the pride that most of the supreme geniuses held in their titles, they were bound to get conceited and attempt to face the youth on his own terms. Even though Damien didn't hold this same pride, he didn't say anything about the weapon. If anything, he welcomed such a thing. This would both be great for his training and also more interesting. Without another word, the two charged at each other. Damien had long deployed his vector field as he burst forth with a vicious left hook. The youth narrowly dodged while slashing down with his sword. Damien twisted his body while altering the sword's path with his vector field, causing it to switch directions. This caught the youth off guard. Not wanting to miss his chance, Damien shot a bolt of black lightning towards the youth, who raised his sword to block. Damien thought it'd be done there, but he was wrong. The lightning was absorbed into the sword as the youth smiled. "I wonder how long you can last against your own lightning." The two clashed once more, but this time, the lightning gathered within the youth's sword sprung forth, attempting to paralyze Damien. While his vector field wouldn't allow him to be touched, he decided to turn it off for now so he could experience true battle. He had already considered his choices long before the event even began, and had decided he'd limit himself during this time. It wouldn't be fun if he caused mass destruction and immediately win. This choice put Damien in a rough spot at the moment, but this kind of pressure was what he wanted. He continued dodging by the skin of his teeth as the youth's attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Unless he wanted to go back on his word, he'd have to think of another strategy to win. Damien quickly teleported out of the young man's range as he got an idea. Without further ado, he also pulled out a sword. This didn't make the youth scared, though. It actually caused him to smile brightly. "Judges, this man is cheating by using an artifact." This was his plan all along. As long as he forced the other party to use their own artifacts, he could call them out and disqualify them, earning their badges. This strategy was specifically created to deal with supreme geniuses. Even if they called him out after he made this move, it wouldn't be counted. The words of a disqualified participant no longer mattered. The crowd outside was able to hear these words, as addressing the judges was a keyword to turn on the audio system. It was set up like this so calls of cheating wouldn't be overlooked in the mayhem of countless battles. The crowd went into a frenzy at the youth's shameless actions, but they couldn't do anything about it. They were just here to watch the event, not participate. Even the announcer was shocked for a second, not thinking that the rules on cheating would be used in such a way. However, the action wasn't illegal, just extremely shameless. The announcer regained his bearings as he addressed the issue. "All right, people, we have our first call for cheating in the event so far. Before anything else, would the accused party like to say a few words in defense?" The arena turned silent as everyone's attention fell on Damien. Even while all this was happening, he stood there with a carefree smile. Seeing how he was being addressed, he shrugged and spoke up. "How am I cheating? I don't see any cheating happening on my side." Once again, everyone was stumped. Was this kid an idiot? The sword was still clearly in his hand, so how could he say he was being falsely accused? But Damien didn't let them wait for too long. As his smile grew, he continued his sentence. "After all, this is just a normal steel sword. Wasn't the rule that artifacts aren't allowed? Well, this isn't an artifact in the slightest." Damien held up the sword for all to witness. The announcer touched his ear, seemingly receiving word from someone with more power before he spoke. It's true, folks. The sword in his hand has been confirmed to be a normal steel sword. What a turn of events. The participant has used a loophole in the rules to turn the odds in his favor." The crowd was silent, trying to comprehend the announcer's words before they erupted into maddening cheers. What a drama they had just witnessed. From the intense fight beforehand to the call for cheating to the loophole, their emotions had been taken on a roller coaster with endless loops. Back in the small realm, the Lenin youth's face had gone pale. He never expected such a loophole, nor did he expect Damien to pull out a normal sword. He didn't even check before calling for cheating, as he didn't want to get eliminated before his call was acknowledged. Robotically turning towards his opponent, he saw Damien looking back at him with a devilish grin on his face. Now that that's over, it's time to have some fun. Damien raised his sword and decided to teach this youth a lesson. Void Sword Art, third step, spatial collapse. Damien's steel sword smashed into the ground and shattered on impact, but it still achieved its intended effects. Space bent and twisted as the solid ground beneath their feet took on a more rubbery texture. The Lenin youth was horrified and attempted to run, but his attempts were futile. When he went forward, he'd end up heading left, and when he went left, he'd end up going right. There was no sense of direction within the collapsing space. Damien had toned down the power of his attack, so the youth was able to leave the collapsing space relatively unharmed. But he had made a misstep within the space as he recklessly attempted to escape, causing his arm to superimpose an area of the twisted ground and fuse with it. In a panic, he had completely severed that arm. Damien smiled at this scene before walking up to the youth and sliding his wristband off of his only remaining arm. Next time, be careful who you mess with. Not everyone is as nice as me. With that, Damien teleported away. It looked like the last 4 days of the survival games would truly be a fun time. Chapter 55, Survival Games 3. The days passed in a flash as Damien and Catherine continued gaining points. It was already the last day of the event, so not many participants were still active. Due to this, it was much harder to find opponents and gain points. Both Damien and Catherine had already made their way up to the top of the leaderboard through their efforts, gaining massive amounts of bracelets from the stronger foes they defeated, but neither had run into another supreme genius in this time. This was confusing. There were a total of 50 of them, so logically they should have more encounters, but this spoke to the immensity of the small realm they were in. There were 5 regions of varying climates, and most people would choose the one that aligned closest with their affinity. Even while the realm shrunk, a piece of each of these environments would still be present, and perhaps many of the supreme geniuses had already fallen. However, everything would change today. As the day began, the rate of shrinking within the realm increased by a large margin, crowding everyone towards the flatlands in the center. Damien stood at the edge of this flatland and covertly watched as more and more people arrived. He'd already been in this position for a few hours, and a few hundred people were strewn along the area, warily eyeing each other. As more and more people crowded in, the announcer's voice fell on their ears. "Listen up, participants. There are currently 1,506 of you remaining. Congratulations. However, this number is a bit too much for us. Being smart people, I'm sure you all know what I mean." Damien swore. He could hear the announcer grin through his words. "A battle royale. Until only 1,050 of you remain, duke it out and see who comes out on top. Leaving the flatland area means disqualification. Now begin." Nobody moved. They all watched the people next to them vigilantly as they planned their next course of action. It would be embarrassing to fall here due to carelessness. Since nobody else wanted to make the first move, Damien decided to take it upon himself. A faint black hue emanated from his body for a split second before lightning erupted in his surroundings. The thick black snakes traveled through the air and ground in all directions, attempting to sunder everything in their path. 2 of the participants nearby Damien were immediately paralyzed and knocked out, while the third managed to narrowly dodge. He quickly moved to collect their bracelets before looking up. The entire arena was quiet, staring at him before all mayhem broke loose. It seemed that his move had been a horn to begin. Damien grinned. He would only use lightning in this free-for-all unless he was forced to teleport. Running a constant stream of electricity through his internal body, Damien increased his speed 5-fold as he dashed into the battlefield. Chaos was everywhere. Various elemental attacks were flying randomly through the air without target. The ground rumbled and quaked in some areas while massive water spouts and pillars of fire sprouted up in others. The crowd was stunned. This was a true free-for-all between 1,500 people, so it was naturally insane to watch. Damien maneuvered through the battlefield like a fox as he found opponents and rapidly took them out, gaining points. But this wasn't his main goal. He was looking for a supreme genius to fight. On the other side of the battlefield, Catherine was also having a great time. Just like Damien, she had put away her illusions and was solely relying on wind to take care of her enemies. Tornadoes picked up and threw participants into chaos before they were finished off by blades and bullets of wind. She rushed through the masses of people while accumulating points even faster than Damien. Wind was usually used as a supportive element, but her training had always been focused on making it destructive. Her last fight with Evan had been a small portion of what she'd learned in the 6 months Damien was creating his mana circuits. Her teacher, one of the two grand elders of the academy, was extremely adept at illusions to the point of slightly affecting reality. She could create constructs with true physical weight and power that she could then use in battle, even changing the environment to something completely different for short periods. When Catherine saw this, she was made aware of how much potential she was wasting in her illusions. She wanted to reach a level where she could make someone doubt whether their whole life was illusion or reality. She wanted reality to become her illusion. Due to her intense focus on this, she had fallen behind on her wind affinity, but she made up for this by combining the two. Her small success in illusions allowed her to maintain smaller constructs as she pleased, so she used it to enhance her wind. She used illusions to create the tornadoes and used wind to power them, causing her to need much less focus to keep them active. She had also gotten the idea of compressing wind from Zara, who showed her how she used ice. Catherine took this slight inspiration and expanded on it, creating blades that could rip through the atmosphere. She was extremely impressed by Damien's spatial affinity and worked to be able to manipulate space using air as a medium in the future. While Catherine used her newly improved abilities to eliminate her competitors, Damien finally ran into his first supreme genius. It was a man with a robust body that contrasted his wolf ears and tail. The screens on the outside quickly zoomed into this confrontation. The rest of the supreme geniuses were avoiding each other, seemingly saving their strength for later rounds of the event. The Beast Empress smiled as she watched them. The boy has evolved through many beasts, but the wolf still takes the forefront in his instinct. It's only natural that those two will feel rivalry immediately upon meeting. Truthfully, she was also a wolf-type beast. This wasn't a fact known to many, and her strength was too high for it to be pinpointed from her aura. This was also why she was interested in Zara. It wasn't that she wanted to consume Zara for her evolution, rather she was interested in taking her as a disciple. She also had the ice element after all, and she could sense the icy aura emanating from Zara, making her believe it might be fate for the two to meet. Noticing that Damien was an evolved human only made her want to take Zara as a disciple even more. Her invitation for Damien to come to the beast domain was so he could train with her husband while she took care of Zara. She felt a connection to the young wolf that felt almost familial, making her curious about the wolf's origins. Meanwhile, within the arena things were progressing as the Beast Empress expected. When Damien and the demihuman locked eyes, their instincts flared. The person in front of them would give them an amazing fight. They both grinned at each other while ignoring everything around them. "I'm Ethan Wolfang, you," the demihuman said. "Damien Void, I seem to have a lot of fate with wolves," Damien replied with a grin. The two didn't need any more words. They already understood each other's intent. Pure physical strength, no affinities. This was how they would compete. Damien stretched a bit. It had been a long time since he fought in such a primitive way, and he couldn't say he wasn't excited. The two men charged at each other. Punching forward, their fists connected, causing a shockwave that threw away anyone who was in their vicinity. "We're equal," they both thought before they continued their exchange. Fists connected with flesh and kicks pushed them back. The ground around them cracked from the many impacts it was forced to sustain. Neither of them blocked and neither backed down. Their fight grew in intensity until they were rushing all through the battlefield, acting like a tornado that would shred anything in its path. Boom! Their fists connected once more, but it seemed to carry some sort of resonance effect as the shockwave was amplified. Three unlucky individuals in their surroundings were caught off guard and directly knocked out. "Ha ha ha ha," Damien roared with laughter. "This is it. I haven't had a fight like this in ages." Ethan was similarly jubilant. He was always known for his monstrous physical strength, making him undefeated by most people within his class range, but he'd finally met his match. Once again, the two punched forward, directly connecting with each other's faces. Blood splashed and teeth were knocked out, but neither cared. In fact, Damien was suppressing his regeneration to the same level as Ethan's to allow the fight to continue. Boom, boom. Everywhere they went they left havoc in their wake. Damien connected another kick to Ethan's ribs, while the latter landed an uppercut to Damien's chin. It didn't seem like their fight would end anytime soon. They continued like this for almost an hour. At some point, the announcer's voice had resounded, telling the participants to stop fighting. There were only 1,051 people left in the tournament. Whoever lost the current bout would be the last person eliminated. Knowing this, the rest of the competitors backed away from the vicinity of the fight. They didn't want to be the next ones to be accidentally caught in the crossfire. Abruptly, the two fighters separated. Looking at the fire in each other's eyes, they knew what they wanted. One final clash to decide it all. Black lightning crackled around Damien's body, making him look like a devil, while fire erupted from Ethan's. But neither made any big moves. Instead, they focused their elemental mana in their fists and rushed towards each other. Achille! With a loud cry, Damien shot his fist forward to connect with Ethan's. An even bigger explosion came forth. The mix of fire and lightning was extremely destructive, charring the ground and creating a small crater beneath their feet. But neither of them moved. They kept pushing their fists together as if they didn't want the other to get even a single bit of leeway. Finally, they once again jumped back. While everyone was confused about what just happened, Damien spoke up. In the final 12. Ethan nodded with a grin. In the final 12. They both sat down and healed their injuries as Damien looked around him. Spotting a random competitor, Damien teleported over and stole his bracelet without anyone noticing. It was only when the announcer's voice rang out that people realized what happened. A participant has been disqualified. The first round of our Nexus event has finally concluded. Stay tuned for the next round, folks. It looks like we have plenty of blood-boiling action ahead of us. The crowd let out a wave of cheers. Even though it was only the first event, it had already brought them so much excitement. They couldn't wait for the next round to start. Chapter 56, Interlude 1. The participants were once again covered in spatial light as they were teleported back to the main arena. Upon arrival, they were greeted with a cacophony of cheers, with various names being chanted over each other. Damien even heard his own name being chanted by certain sections of the crowd. Looking around, Damien saw the leaderboard and understood why. The top 50 were clearly outlined and he was at the top of that list. Surprisingly, though, he wasn't in first. First, Catherine Hart, 75 points. Seeing the name, a grin formed on his face. Losing sucks, but at least it was her I lost to. Damien's name was in second with 66 points. The board was lined with names that would become famous after the event, and surprisingly, only around half of them were supreme geniuses. While only around 15 of them were eliminated, many were schemed against and outwitted into losing many of the bracelets they collected. The 1,050 remaining participants were led off the stage and towards many back rooms for them to rest. They would be given a day to recuperate before the next event started. The announcer gave them one last tip as they left. Pay attention to and make friends with the people around you, competitors. All I'll say is that the people you're sharing the private room with will be important in the next round. While they walked, Damien felt a nudge from behind him. Weren't you going to wipe the floor with me? What happened to all your confidence? A familiar voice said tauntingly. Damien smiled as his hand snaked back and pinched her waist. Yeah, okay, this is just the first event. Let's see how you keep that energy after the next one. Catherine slapped his hand away with a red face as she increased her pace and walked by his side. That event was truly fun, though. I got to test out a lot of things that I had only theorized in my training. Damien nodded. For sure. I limited my spatial ability so I could have more fun, and it was a great time, especially that last fight. I wonder what the next game will be, though. There are still so many participants left, and only 2 more events before the final 12 tournament. Damien glanced around at the crowd of participants around them as he nodded. True, If they keep doing solo events like this, it'll take forever to whittle down the numbers while keeping the crowd entertained. As the two continued to discuss the event, they arrived at the private rooms arranged for them. Each room was meant to fit 3 people, so there was ample space. This was to further the original goal of the event, which is to forge ties between the various nations and races. Damien and Catherine entered one of the private rooms and sat down on the couch as they continued talking. The room was around the size of a 2-bedroom apartment and came complete with a king-sized bed, full bathroom, and an assortment of various snacks. There was also a screen in the room that was a smaller version of those used to display the events to the audience. These were like this world's adaptation of television. Damien wondered why there was only one bed when the room was meant for 3 people, but that question was soon answered. As he relaxed on the couch, Catherine suddenly pulled a lever that caused them to end up on their backs. It seemed this world had couch beds as well. Catherine had pulled the lever to catch Damien off guard and see his startled expression, thinking it would be a fun prank. But clearly, she didn't think things through. They were a man and a woman now alone in a room laying on a relatively smaller bed together. Their bodies were practically touching already. Glancing sideways, she ended up catching Damien looking at her too. Their faces were only inches apart. Seconds ticked away as the two stared into each other's eyes before they abruptly snapped out of their dazes. Catherine looked away hurriedly. Her face blushed red and she thought of ways to get out of her current predicament, but there was no need. Her guardian angel had shown up in the form of a giant black wolf that squeezed herself into the spot between them, alleviating the awkwardness. Truthfully, Catherine wasn't the only one saved. Damien had just discovered that his bestial instinct also had a taste for other kinds of battle. The second he turned his head and saw her face only inches away from him, his instinct flared, and like a little devil on his shoulder, it tried its hardest to coerce him into losing control. Not knowing what to do in this situation, Damien went with his first idea, acting oblivious. He was a genuine weeb before he accidentally transmigrated, so he knew the ins and outs of this kind of situation. Japanese main characters are always dense as shit, and that's the only reason the romance doesn't develop until the last episode of the entire anime. I'm a genius. Zara had come out after feeling his panic and hearing the idiotic thoughts running through his head. She glanced at him and rolled her eyes while sending various messages through their mental connection. If Damien had to translate, it would come out as something like, "Why are you being such a wuss about it? She wants to mate with you too, right? So just do it, weirdo." He had the urge to facepalm continuously while rolling on the ground with shame. Where did his innocent Zara even learn things like that? Not to mention, this was his first time in such a precarious situation. He wondered why this instinct didn't flare during his earlier interactions with her, as well since this sort of closeness was only slightly rare at this point. Usually, neither of them would think much of it. They would just continue talking or messing around as if everything was normal. So why was his instinct acting up now? It can't be that I had that thought first, right? The only explanation he could think of was that the instinct had just amplified thoughts that he already had, but he quickly shook off that idea. Let's continue playing the dense MC role. I don't have the mental capacity to deal with this right now. All this while, he was hugging Zara's body while ignoring the painful silence that filled the room. Catherine was having similar yet completely different thoughts. What's happening to me? Since when did it become like that? Whatever it is, this can wait until the event ends. Focus on what's ahead of you, she cheered herself on. Then, as if it was a message from God, the screen in the room turned on. The announcer's face popped up along with an alternating view of many different fields with different terrains. There was a completely flat and rocky area, a small sea filled with islands, a huge mountain, and even a city. As the two's attention focused on the screen, the announcer started speaking. "Greetings, competitors. I know you're all enjoying your rest, so don't worry. I won't take too much of your time. However, it's time for me to explain the next game. This game is called Monolith Capture. This is a team versus team game. Participants are grouped into teams of 3 and given 1 week to familiarize with each other and strategize. The view on the screen changed to a large rectangular object that was made out of some type of smooth metal. Each team possesses a monolith that they are responsible for guarding. Just like the survival games, each player has a bracelet artifact, but its use is very different. If you get within 10 meters of the opposing team's monolith, you can activate this bracelet to open it. A man walked into the range of the rectangular monolith and injected mana into his bracelet. Suddenly, the monolith split in half top to bottom, and the back half fell to the floor. On the now opened inside of the monolith, there was a small screen. Inside the monolith is a code or phrase, a type of password. The goal is to type this password into your own team's monolith. The team that succeeds first wins the round, and the team that wins 2 rounds first is the overall winner. Did you ever play Capture the Flag as a kid? Well, this game is a more advanced version of that. There are 350 teams at the moment, and the game will continue until only 100 teams remain, aka 300 participants. As for your teammates, why do you think each private room holds 3 people? As I said before, you have 1 week to strategize, so get to it. With that, the screen shut off. It was only after hearing the announcer's words that the two of them realized that there was supposed to be another person in the room. As they robotically stood up from the couch, an elf who looked in her 20s entered their view. Hello, my name is Eva Locke. It'll be a pleasure working with you. She was also on the leaderboard, so she would usually have a more confident demeanor, but the 2 others in the room were currently staring at her with death glares and billowing auras, so she couldn't help but shy away. Damien and Catherine looked at each other. Silence her. Silence her. The 2 dashed at Eva. Wait, we can talk this out. As she ran away from them, Eva desperately pleaded. Meanwhile, Zara sat in the corner enjoying the show. Embarrassment wasn't something she understood. Maybe it was just beast culture, but seeing Damien get all flustered confused her, but also amused her. It took several hours for the newly formed team to calm down. Eva had been thoroughly questioned and they made sure she saw nothing. As for the questioning method, it doesn't need to be mentioned. After they calmed down, they had a chance to properly talk over the event. Catherine started the conversation. This game will heavily rely on strategy and teamwork. We can't just wantonly charge forward or the other team will easily be able to grab our code and win. To start, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Catherine Hart. I have a wind and illusion affinity. Damien Void, spatial and lightning affinity. Finally, it was the newcomer's turn. Eva Locke, nature affinity. Damien raised his brow before grinning. Ho! It seems like this event might be even easier than the first. Chapter 57, Monolith Capture 1. The structure of the Monolith Capture event was simple. Just like the survival games, the main event would also last a week, with 25 matches occurring every day. There would be 12 in the morning and 13 at night. It was truly convenient that the matches were recorded, so people could watch them even if they weren't present while it was happening live. This way, people could prioritize what they wanted to watch without missing any dark horses or interesting drama. For this reason, it was possible to hold many matches simultaneously. Within the private room, Damien, Catherine, and Eva were still discussing their plans. This guy over here is a brute through and through, so we should take care of the planning. Just make him follow whatever we come up with, Catherine said while eyeing Damien. Oi, he countered, but he couldn't say anything. She was telling the truth. His battle sense and power were both extremely high, but his talent in strategizing was either not present or hadn't bloomed. He had never needed to do too much strategizing. The dungeon was always filled with the most primal of battles, and once he left it, he had felt a severe lack of life or death situations. So he let Catherine do the planning. If anything, this was what teamwork meant in the first place. He couldn't do everything himself, so he needed people to rely on to cover his weaknesses. Damien suddenly had a thought. "Hey, Eva, can you expand a bit about what your nature affinity can do?" Eva looked hesitant but still decided to speak. "It's mainly as it sounds. Within a certain area, any nature is within my control. Trees, plants, and even the earth are included within my ability." Damien fell into thought. This will be a major benefit to us when the terrain is in our favor, but there were islands and cities within the terrains we saw on the screen. We need to figure out a strategy that prevents her from being a liability. Voicing his thoughts, Damien looked to Catherine for the decision. She thought for a moment before responding. "Don't worry, I have a plan." The week passed by in a flash as the many different teams worked to synergize and coordinate their attack patterns. It wasn't enough time to become truly cohesive, but it was enough to learn how to work together. There would always be teams that couldn't work together, but that was their bad luck. In the first place, the teams were randomized. Otherwise, Damien and Catherine, who were second and first place in the first event, would have never been put on a team together. The event also had one other mechanic that was based on luck. By the end of the event, only 100 teams were allowed to move forward, but with the way it was structured, 175 teams would win by the end of the week. Due to this, another mechanism was added. 150 of those remaining teams would fight once again for their spot to continue, while 25 teams will be seeded directly to the third round. Since they didn't know how many times they'd be fighting and also what terrain they'd be in, every team had to come up with various strategies to win. Just one or two wouldn't cut it. Damien, Catherine, and Eva walked out of their private room. The first day of monolith capture had officially begun. Damien's luck was always good, but it seemed like it didn't want to help him anymore after putting him on the same team as Catherine. Their team was one of the first to compete. This would naturally put them at a disadvantage, as others would be able to read their team composition and movements to plan against them. But they weren't worried. They had planned for this very scenario long ago. They walked up to an attendant, who handed them cards with the number 2 on them. This was their team number and the identifier that would be used for them throughout the event. Arriving on the stage, they came face to face with their enemies. It was a team made up of 2 humans and a demi-human. As the 2 teams stared each other down, an automated voice resounded. 13 matches were going on simultaneously, so the support team for the event most likely prepared these recordings beforehand. Team 2 versus Team 43, match start. When Damien opened his eyes, they were in a lush forest similar to the one he saw when he first arrived on the surface. "Good," he said. "This works perfectly with our plan." Catherine continued his sentence. "Eva, you guard the monolith. Damien, you know what to do. Meanwhile, I'll prepare my part." The 3 nodded at each other before they split up. Damien headed straight for the other team while Catherine split to the left. The monolith was right behind them when they spawned, so Eva stayed in place. On the other side, similar events were taking place. "Donald, you know what to do. No matter what, we can't let them approach," said one of the humans to the other. Donald nodded. "Same to you, Clark. 2 of those guys are supreme geniuses, so we need to stay on guard at all times." The 2 of them then turned to the demi-human. "Your physical strength surpasses both of us, Rex. Make sure you don't let anyone stop you. I'll distract their defense while you go straight for the monolith." The 3 nodded at each other. It hadn't taken more than 5 minutes for them to sort everything out, so they thought they were safe. But they were very wrong. Boom! An explosion was heard throughout the forest as a black stream maneuvered its way forward. The group had decided that it'd be best to hide his spatial abilities for now, so he was purely basing his speed on lightning. Unlike the opposing group, theirs had finished planning instantly and split up. There was no need for more talk after all the discussions they had during the week of preparation. Damien zoomed through the forest without pause, seemingly wanting to brute strength his way through the round. Seeing this, Clark's face twisted. "Change of plans. Rex, hold him back. I'll head towards their monolith." Rex, a lion demi-human, immediately rushed forward while Clark split off from him. As he ran, the earth pushed him forward, enhancing his speed. Then he collided with Damien, causing many trees to fall. The two started fighting without care. Earth spikes and large levitating chunks of rock crashed towards Damien, while bolts of lightning snaked towards Rex. They received each other's attacks and flew back. Regaining balance, the two vigilantly stared each other down before they started clashing again. Outside the arena, many participants were watching the match. Damien had made quite the showing in the first round in his fight against Ethan, so many were wary of him. Ethan was also among those watching, as his match was scheduled for the evening portion of the day. He's holding back most of his power, Ethan thought. His physical strength is on par with mine, so there's no way that Lion would be able to fight on par with him. He's more flexible than I thought. In another area, the elf twins that came from Zenith Academy along with Damien were also watching the match. What do you think, Aura? He's been hiding his spatial affinity this whole time. Otherwise, he'd be able to easily win against these weaker competitors, the male twin said. Aura responded. I don't think he has the brain to come up with any strategies, Irene. It must be either that Catherine girl or the elf that's with them. However, we should still be wary. They might be fooling the crowd to increase their unpredictability in the coming rounds. Irene nodded as he continued watching. Out of all the supreme geniuses he'd met before the first round, Damien was still the one who gave him the most dangerous feeling. If we have to go against him and that Catherine girl combined, it'll probably be our hardest fight. Within the forest, Damien and Rex continued clashing, leading each other away from their respective monoliths. Meanwhile, Clark approached Eva's position. If the other two went ahead, she must be the weakest link. After all, she's not a supreme genius like them. Clark snuck towards the monolith as he charged lightning into his hands. Unlike Damien's, this lightning retained its original purple color. When he got within range, he immediately infused his mana into his bracelet, causing the monolith to split and the code within to be revealed. He watched Eva panic within the concealment of the forest as he moved to peek at the code when his foot suddenly got stuck. This damn forest environment. These roots are everywhere. If I'm not careful, it'll limit my mobility and cost us the win. He ignored the problem and continued moving, only to find himself stuck once again. Damn it, he cursed as he tried to free himself, but the moment he took his eyes off her, Eva's entire demeanor changed. She raised her hand before dropping it once again. Countless tendrils of wood and vines charged towards Clark from all angles before entangling him within. Startled, he wantonly released electricity to burn the vines, but he was too late. An entire tree trunk was already heading his way, crashing into his head and knocking him unconscious. Eva smiled. Step 1 complete. On the other side, Donald was still guarding the monolith. He felt an ominous feeling around him, but there was nobody there. He increased his vigilance in watching the surroundings. Unbeknownst to him, the back half of the monolith had already fallen long ago, and a certain princess was already on her way back to her base with the code. Only a few minutes later did the illusion dispel, leaving a horrified Donald as the buzzer rang. The first round had been a clean win by Team 2. The second round was even faster. Since Eva's nature affinity had already been revealed, there was no need to be sneaky. They left Damien, the strongest of them, to guard the monolith and knock out anyone that approached, while Eva entangled the defenders and Catherine stole the code. Even while knowing that illusions could be in play, the other team was unable to do anything. They simply lacked the strength to retaliate. The only reason they had survived so long in the first round was that Damien's team had a larger plan that they became pawns in. And like that, their first battle in the second event ended in an overwhelming victory. Chapter 58, Monolith Capture 2. After their match, Damien and Catherine rested for a few hours before returning to the arena to watch the other matches of the day. Ethan's match had the most obvious outcome. His physical strength was almost unmatched, allowing him to brute force his way through his opponents. Since his team wasn't fighting supreme geniuses, there was no need for strategy. It was an age-old saying that no scheme or trickery matter in the face of absolute strength. It was unknown if the same strategy would be used against stronger opponents, but that didn't matter. The most shocking match was that of the twins. Damien never paid too much attention to the others that had joined from the academy, but it seemed he had to do so starting now. The twins were up against a team with two supreme geniuses just like them, but they outmaneuvered their opponents easily. While the male twin, Irene, was extremely adept at calculation and prediction, the female twin, Aura, was like a battle goddess. When they two were put together, they were truly terrifying. The days passed quickly as many participants were eliminated. Out of the 50 supreme geniuses that were present at the start of the tournament, only half were remaining. Besides getting matched up against each other, there were also plenty of cases where their arrogance cost them the win. Being titled as a supreme genius only outlined one's talent and current strength. Using Evan, who Catherine demolished in the survival games, as an example, it was clear that intellect wasn't present in every genius. Team 2's next match took place on the 4th day of the event, and just like Ethan did previously, they decided to brute strength their way through it. The terrain was a rocky flatland, and with Damien's elemental affinities, he wasn't disadvantaged in the slightest. He charged through the opposing team and directly reached the monolith, cracking it open. Following this, Catherine used her propulsion technique to rapidly arrive at the code and memorize it before heading back to their monolith. Both rounds played out the same way, leaving the opposing team with an irrefutable loss, but a weakness was finally discovered in Team 2. With the lack of plant life, Eva became a liability who couldn't help in the slightest during the round. None of the remaining participants were dumb enough to let this slight detail go. Team 2 was a variable and arguably one of the strongest competitors for them. If they could find even the slightest misstep to use against them, they would. Nature affinity has always been something our kind has prided themselves on, but it has its obvious weak points, Aura said as they watched Team 2 exit the battle stage. Indeed, Irene responded. If we get the city terrain, it'd be the most ideal setup for us. Even if Damien decided to use his spatial abilities, he would be severely limited by the environment. Our greatest threat would be the illusions. The twins continued discussing. They had also won both of their matches and gained the right to proceed, but there was still the final 75 that needed to be eliminated before the next round started. There was no guarantee that any of them would be seeded, so they made ample preparations. Damien, Catherine, and Eva were holding a similar conversation. At this point, our greatest threat is the twins. The other teams are strong, but their intellect doesn't hold a candle to that Irene's, Catherine said. Eva nodded. Even before they left the Elven domain for the academy, they were always lauded as some of the most talented from our generation. If there's anyone we need to be careful of, it's them. Damien was silent, but he still agreed with them. They needed to plan out how to defeat the brain of those twins. Soon, the week ended and the seeded teams were chosen at random. The announcer went up on the stage and used the simplest method, pulling strips of paper out of a sealed box. There was no method to cheat with the mana technology that was inlaid into the box. As expected, neither Team 2 nor the twins were seeded, however. Ethan's team got lucky enough to enter the pick. Damien was happy about this, though. He had no interest in facing Ethan in this kind of strategy game. He wanted to have a rematch where they fight each other with their full strength, without any motive other than knocking the other party out. Using the same format as the previous week, the matches continued for 3 days. It seemed like everyone else noticed the difference in strength between a certain two teams and the rest of the bunch, so they weren't picked to fight until the final day. It was the final fight of the second round, Damien and Catherine versus Irene and Aura. The terrain had already been announced as the city, so Eva was cast out of the picture. Besides her, nobody even remembered the name of the twins' third teammate. He had been largely useless anyway, just riding the coattails of his teammates. Even if he made it to the third round, he was destined to be eliminated at the start. The match between these two groups was especially intense. The first round went to the twins, who used insane strategies to win. Ara went straight for Damien and kept him occupied with a riveting fight while Irene went for the monolith. His affinity was earth, but rather than using it conventionally, he created golems and similar constructs to act as a puppet master. This skill was something he hadn't brought out this far, catching the team off guard and allowing him to win the first round. The second round, however, went a team two. Using a more intricate version of their first strategy, Damien and Catherine managed to trick the twins into making a slight mistake that cost them the win. The audience was in cheers the entire time. This match was by far the most entertaining of those that took place, making it obvious why it was left for last. It was the final round of their match and everything was on the line. The team that lost would lose everything. Damien was currently in a meeting with his other two teammates. "All right, this is it. Let's execute what we've been working towards this whole time." When the round began, Damien immediately teleported towards the enemy monolith. It wasn't time to hide his spatial affinity anymore. Halfway there, he met Aura once again, but she didn't attempt to stop him. Rather, they both kept rushing towards the other side's monolith. This last round wasn't one of strength nor strategy, it was purely reliant on speed. It was a race to see who could read and input the other's code faster. Damien rushed to the monolith and quickly opened it, memorizing the code. All that was left was to reach his home base. Since warping was too much of a cheat, he decided to normally teleport back. There was no excitement in taking the easy way out. As Damien made his way back, Aura also reached the monolith. She activated her bracelet and opened it, but didn't immediately go for the code. First, she launched a plethora of attacks at its structure to make sure it was truth and not an illusion. This was all the confirmation she needed. Illusions were still made up of mana after all. If she let out a constant barrage on the boundary of the illusion, it'd show at least the slightest fluctuation. As she went to read the code, she silently celebrated. There was one final hidden card that would easily win her this match. The truth was, she and her twin brother shared a telepathic connection. Their closeness had been a result of this. Ever since their birth, they could hear and read each other's thoughts. As they grew up, they became two sides of the same coin. As long as Aura read the code, Irene could immediately input it into the monolith. Sharing her excitement, Irene waited patiently with his hands at the monolith, ready to input the code immediately. He failed to notice the small vines that started creeping out of the cracks in the floor. As both sides raced to the finish, everyone outside watched with bated breaths. This kind of showdown was far from what they expected to happen this round. One team had the smartest brain in the tournament, while the other had the strongest brawn. For it to come down to speed made the results of the match even more unpredictable. Even Ethan didn't know what to think as he watched. From the way things are going, it seems the twins are going to win, but with how confident Damien sounded last time we talked, there should be something I'm missing, right? After he had been seated, he went and had a conversation with Damien. The two had already scheduled their match in the top 12, so it'd be a shame if one of them didn't make it. Furthermore, the two ended up sparring to help each other improve. "Well, he seems to be someone I could be great friends with, and none of my friends are average people. Let's see what he has up his sleeve." Aura had already reached the monolith. As she read the code, she saw Damien appear in the room. She couldn't help but grin. It was truly a tight match, but they were guaranteed to win now. Irene received the code through their link and immediately moved to type it in when his body abruptly stiffened. What's happening to me? No matter how much he tried, he couldn't move. An affinity that controlled nature sounded like something peace-loving elves would have, but that wasn't necessarily true. Poison could also be made naturally. From within the shadows of the room, a figure emerged. This was Eva, who had been lying in wait all this time. "You know," she said, "it's not good to underestimate your opponents." On the other side of the city, Aura also stiffened for a second. But they weren't out of options yet. Even as Damien approached, she tried her best to convey the code to their third teammate in hopes of pulling off a game winner, but her hope didn't last long. She suddenly found Damien in front of the monolith that was suddenly a few inches in front of its earlier position. and the code in its surface was completely different. A backup plan of a backup plan, Damien said. We could never be too careful when it came to someone with intellect on par with you two. The reason the monolith could withstand her attacks without fluctuation was that, at that time, it wasn't an illusion. It was only in the final moment before she arrived in front of it that Catherine slightly shifted its position and code to fool her. Before Ara's helpless eyes, Damien punched in the code of their monolith, effectively winning the game. The second round of the Nexus event had ended just like that. Chapter 59, Interlude 2. After they were teleported back onto the stage, the twins approached Damien's group. "Congratulations on your win," Irene said. Although he was visibly disgruntled, he still acted like a good sport. "Seriously, that last move was insane," Ara continued. Her eyes were starry as she looked at Eva, not seeming bothered by the loss. Rather than being bothered, she was excited to see an elf around their age who could keep up with supreme geniuses like Damien and Catherine. Thank you," Eva responded meekly. Through their cooperation with her, Damien and Catherine had learned that her confidence only emerged when she was in battle, causing them endless amusement. "If you don't mind me asking, did you plan for that situation all along?" Irene asked, getting straight to the point. Everyone knew which situation he was talking about. Seeing that these twins were amiable people, Damien's group treated them the same. They slowly explained their game plan to the twins. The plan they had made was simple. Hiding Damien's spatial abilities would benefit them if they faced anyone who hadn't met them at the academy, so it was more of a precaution. Meanwhile, the crux of their strategy was to undermine Eva's value. Eva had a nature affinity, which showed its best potential in environments filled with lush greenery. No matter what, this would be revealed when they ended up in a forest environment. And since the forest was their first terrain, they decided to capitalize on it. Eva went all out and incapacitated the opposing team members without any issue, showing her use. Now that most of the attention was focused on Eva, it was time for the next step of the plan. Their next location was a rocky flatland. During this round, Eva made sure to do nothing outstanding. Damien and Catherine carried the team as they plowed through the opposition. With Eva barely being useful, people started to make assumptions. They used the second round of this match to solidify those assumptions that Eva wasn't useful outside of a green terrain. It was important for her to be seen as the weak link of the group. And finally, their last opponent game. When they realized it was the twins they were up against, they knew that hiding Damien's spatial ability was pointless, as they came from the same academy. This didn't discourage them, though. The first round was lost due to a surprise move on the twins' side, but they regained their footing in the second. All this time, they continued to play Eva as a weak link whose participation no longer mattered. And it all came to fruition during that final round. It was a round where speed took priority over strength and wits like the previous two rounds. In this round, any small distraction would cost the win, causing both teams to enter a hyper-focused state. In this state, the twins had failed to realize Eva's continued presence in their base. She had been warped there by Damien at the very start. After all, he already knew the base's location from the previous rounds. If he wanted, Damien could have ended the monolith capture game in an instant. His power was simply a perfect counter for the game's mechanics. However, he didn't do it because he wanted to have fun. This is why the only time he used warp was to get Eva into position. While the two teams raced to each other's monoliths, she planted seeds within the cracks on the ground, and the vines that sprouted from them snaked their way to Irene. A nature affinity was special in this way. It was mainly used to nurture rather than fight, but when needed, this nurturing power could be turned against enemies. Eva's young age was the reason people assumed she couldn't capitalize on this and only used her power for crowd control. And the truth was, they were right. Eva indeed had no idea her power could be used this way until she met Damien and Catherine. The creativity of these two with elusive elements helped her break past a roadblock that she had been facing for many years regarding her attack power. And once she knew the direction, It didn't take her long to figure out the application. She had brought small poisonous plant seeds with her into the final round and had already achieved permission from the support staff of the event. Although her role seemed small, in that she only stunned Irene near the end, this small move was what won them the match. Even with the fail-safe they had made of Catherine using illusions on the monolith, it wasn't guaranteed that they won until Irene had been incapacitated. The plan overall was a simple case of misdirection that had reaped immense benefits. As the twins listened, their eyes were filled with an understanding light. It's no wonder. The plan focused on the innate arrogance that everyone carries. If it wasn't for this, there's no way we would have overlooked anyone even if they were the weakest participant. Damien smiled and nodded. To be honest, even we would probably do the same in your situation. We were titled as supreme geniuses, and even if many with the same title have fallen, it doesn't discredit our achievement. It's natural for us to hold arrogance and look down on those normal participants, but it needs to be remembered that they're geniuses in their own right. After all, look at our little Eva here, Damien said teasingly as he patted her head. Eva blushed slightly, causing Catherine's eyes to narrow as she went directly for Damien's waist, giving it a solid pinch. "Ow, ow, what's that for?" Damien cried as he acted exaggeratedly pained. "HMPH. It doesn't matter what it was for, just know you deserved it," Catherine replied as she turned her head away, hiding her slight smile. Eva also smiled helplessly as she watched the two. Even her first meeting with them had begun with her witnessing the subtle tension between them. How could she not understand what was going on? Only, she had no plans to interfere. She never even saw Damien romantically, only blushing due to the unexpected contact. She wasn't racist by any means, but to please her family she wanted to marry within the elven clans. The group continued talking about the various strategies they had made for the game as they went back to the private rooms assigned to them. Although the twins had been disqualified, they were supreme geniuses, so their accommodations were covered until the end of the tournament. They were more than welcome to stay and watch. When the group split up, Eva also followed the twins, as she had gotten friendly with Ara during their short time talking. Damien and Catherine smiled as they walked away. She was fun to hang out with during this past week. It's a little sad that we won't be able to see her again. Damien shook his head as he responded. Why wouldn't you get to see her again? We live in the same world and not all elves stay within the Helia forest, so the possibility always exists. Catherine nodded, trying to shake off her slight loneliness. Noticing this, Damien changed the subject. It's almost time for the final round, you know. While they allowed 300 participants to pass this round, it'll only be 12 from the next. And after that, we can finally fight like we've been wanting to do since our first meeting. Catherine's eyes brightened. With a battle maniac, talking about fighting was always the best medicine. "That's right," she exclaimed. "I can finally beat your ass and show you who's the best between us." Damien grinned, seeing her mood improve. "Yup, it's finally time for us to figure that out. After that, we get to do some fun adventuring." Damien was obviously referring to the secret realm. He still didn't have much information on it, but it being shrouded in mystery only made him more excited. Just like he felt back in the dungeon, he knew. Maybe it was something he inherently had, or maybe it was a feature of his eyes, but something within him was screaming. A massive opportunity was waiting for him within that secret realm. Shoving down his bubbling excitement, Damien continued to chat with Catherine as he waited for the screen to turn on once again to show them the rules for the final round. It didn't take long, as the announcer's face popped into his view only 2 hours later. "Good evening once again. As you all know, only 300 of you remain in the event, and we're reaching the final stretch. It's time for me to reveal our last game. This game will be much more simple than the previous one. It's called King of the Hill. The rules are also not nearly as complicated. The first round was based on survival, the second based on intelligence, and now this third round is based on strength, though your wits will definitely help you. Competitors will be separated into groups of 25 and put in their respective arenas. Each arena has a single capture point. The goal of this round is to stay within the radius of the capture point as long as possible. The projection shifted to show 12 small mountains that were lined up adjacent to one another. At the peak of each mountain, there was a circular zone with a black flag in the middle. As long as you're in that radius, you'll gain points with time. Only one person is allowed within the radius at one time. If two people are in there at the same time, no points will be awarded. This game will be unlike the previous two. It is a game of speed and fortune. The time limit will only be a single day, and the 12 people with the most points at the end will advance to the fighting tournament. Good luck, competitors. With that, the screen went black once again. Damien and Catherine looked at each other and grinned. Was it sheer coincidence, or was it planned for the start? There were only 12 supreme geniuses left in the competition after the twins were disqualified. It was obvious what this meant. Either the supreme geniuses would easily pass this game and fill the top 12, or a dark horse would bare its fangs and cause an upset. The closing act of the Nexus event had begun. Chapter 60, King of the Hill 1. Damien had no plans to go easy during this round like he did in the previous two. He would be the only supreme genius within the 25 competitors in his arena, so he'd be a prime target. Not to mention, after this round came the top 12 tournament where he would truly fight the best of the best. He didn't want to waste any more time on those that couldn't cause his eyes to let off even the slightest hint of a warning bell. It wasn't even a matter of levels at this point. Rather, it once again came back to control and mana circuits. The former was something that could be improved with practice, but the latter was usually present only in large families or clans. Time passed quickly as hype for the final game grew. In the penthouse that Damien's group entered when they first arrived at the venue, the leaders of the various powers were conversing. It's surprising how many of the supreme geniuses fell this year. Not only were they paired with each other quite often, but there were also many normal competitors with tactical knowledge that surpassed them. The Elf Queen stated as she observed the competitors who were approaching the stage. Indeed, not only that, even the disparity between supreme geniuses was large this year. There were 3 in particular that I've had my eyes on, responded the Dwarf King. Well, one of them is of royal descent, so that isn't too surprising. The other 2 boys have astonishing physical strength. I haven't seen that boy Ethan use much of his fire abilities, but that Damien kid has some powerful lightning, the Stanton Emperor pointed out. Malcolm smiled at this. If you knew how weak his lightning is in comparison to his other affinity, how would you react then? Suddenly, an unexpected voice rang out. That boy is still hiding the majority of his power. If I'm not wrong, his main abilities should stem from his spatial affinity. The teleportation he showed in the previous rounds was just the tip of the iceberg. Everyone turned to the pink-haired man who had spoken with surprise. He wasn't the talkative type, so it was rare to hear him praise someone. Most of them hadn't even heard him praise his own children, let alone an outsider. The Beast Empress giggled. My, who would have expected you to praise that boy? That girl is the second princess, no? It seems she's taken quite a liking to him. Maybe you've already considered accepting him into your family. The fact that Catherine was one of the royal children didn't matter much to these leaders. There was no ban on their descendants participating in the tournament. It was just that most of them held too much arrogance to compete with the masses in such a fashion. They didn't enjoy sheltering their children, as they knew that life or death battles and the pressure of real danger were the best way to temper their wills and abilities, but they couldn't do much about situations like this. This event was meant for enjoyment and building personal relations. They didn't need to appear. Besides that, they didn't want to involve politics in an affair like this one, so they never pressured their children to compete. The Adelaire Emperor spoke again, continuing the previous conversation. HMPH, the boy is an unknown. Until I find out where he came from and what his goals are, I won't give him the slightest chance. The Lenin Emperor raised his brow. I've heard that your second daughter has an adventurous personality. Are you sure she'd even ask your opinion before she makes that decision, James? The Adelaire Emperor's brows twitched. Even he doubted this point. He was also a youth that yearned for freedom at one point. He had roamed the continent and carved a name for himself through various deeds, allowing him to maintain the position he had today. He knew that he wouldn't be able to sway her decision if she wanted something, and since she usually aimed to earn those things with her own strength, he wouldn't interfere. However, this matter was different. Regardless of his status and regardless of his indifferent demeanor, he was still her father. At the end of the day, all he wanted was to make sure she wasn't being conned or trapped by someone despicable. But he also knew that his worries were needless. Catherine's eyes never failed her when judging people's true intentions and personalities. This feature was why he always allowed her to venture relatively unaccompanied, as long as she was disguised and used her fake name. While the emperors conversed, the competitors had been transported to the bottoms of their respective mountains. Out of the 300 remaining, only 12 would move forward. These odds lit fires of determination in each of the competitors' eyes. Regardless of whether they won or lost, they'd earn glory, but that didn't change anything. Nobody was content with quitting here. Damien looked up at the mountain in front of him and was genuinely unimpressed. It wasn't his fault, though. He had spent 6 months training on one of the largest mountains in the human domain. Compared to that behemoth, this one looked like a mere hill, which was apt considering the game's name. The surface was mostly rocky with patches of forest here and there. It was clearly a terrain made for the competition rather than something that would grow in nature. Damien then moved on to the other 24 participants around him. It seemed they'd come to an unsaid agreement, as all their eyes were focused on him. Damien couldn't suppress the predatory grin that formed on his face. Since you want to play like that, I'll get just a tad bit more serious. Let's see how you deal with me then. As the announcer's voice rang out, the final round finally began. Without wasting a single second, Damien had already teleported hundreds of meters up the mountain, startling both the competitors and the audience outside. Thus far, he had only shown a range that spanned a few tens of meters, so the abrupt change was shocking. Not minding the dazed opposition, Damien continued making his way up the mountain. It was only when he reached the halfway point that the others realized their mistake. They didn't attack nor hinder each other as they all climbed the mountain. Their only goal was to defeat this supreme genius in front of them. Everything else came later. When Damien reached the peak, a holographic screen appeared in front of him. Participant Damien Void. Time captured 0.00003. Points earned 0. The announcer had never explained how much time needed to pass for one to earn points, so Damien kept a close eye on this screen as the other competitors closed the distance. Even after they arrived, Damien didn't pay attention to them. They threw a plethora of elemental attacks at him from afar, hoping to cause him trouble before they could arrive, but it was wholly ineffective. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Every attack they launched at him bounced back after reaching a certain distance from him. It was as if he was completely impervious to their assault. Time captured 0.00514. Points earned 5. Damien was still focused on the screen in front of him. It seemed that every minute he would earn a point, but he had arrived at the capture point too early, leaving him to wait 5 minutes before the tally even began. It made sense for the points to count at such a rapid pace. In usual situations, the person occupying the capture point would constantly be changing, leading to a lack of points being gained if it took too long to earn them. Besides, the points only mattered in this one round. They didn't count towards overall ranking, which would be decided by the single elimination tournament. Those that were eliminated here would be ranked based on the overall points they gained through all the rounds combined, though. These people would make up the rest of the top 50, who would gain access to the secret realm. Suddenly, the counter paused. When Damien looked up, he saw that another competitor had entered the circle with him. The circle was large but only enough to contain around 3 people if they were moving constantly during battle. For this reason, the other competitors decided to enter direct combat one by one while the rest supported from the back. Damien still didn't pay attention to them. In this round, there were no early eliminations and everyone would be eliminated at the very end, so he couldn't be too hard on them when it came to injuries. Otherwise, the round would end too fast. He just lightly flicked lightning at the ones who entered the capture point, pushing them out of range, while casually blocking the ranged assault with his vector field. The audience was stunned by this overbearing performance. This wasn't how the tournament was supposed to go, right? Their doubts were easily confirmed when they looked at the screens that showed the other battles taking place. It was a fierce competition, where even supreme geniuses were having trouble keeping the capture point locked for long periods. There were only 3 screens, where the other competitors didn't stand a single chance. One was Damien, whose case didn't need to be explained further. The next was Ethan. He still wasn't utilizing his elemental abilities much, only using his fire to block larger projectiles that were headed towards him. His main style was simply punching competitors out of his ring as they came, brute forcing his way to the top. The final one was Catherine. Her case was more artistic to watch. She danced through incoming projectiles as if she was putting on a show. Her movements were both graceful and precise, leaving a strong impression that won the hearts of many men in the audience. Besides that, she didn't need to face a single competitor in direct combat. Anytime one of them attempted to walk forward into the ring, they'd end up moving in another random direction. Sometimes right, sometimes left, and sometimes even backward as they walked down the mountain. Some competitors even tried walking in another direction from the start, hopping to trick the illusion, but they just ended up looking dumb. For these 3 geniuses, this round was a breeze. However, an interesting show was taking place within one of the other arenas.